Humanities, Relocating the Territories of Nature. On behalf of the organizing team and the varied disciplines representing humanities of Bishop Heber College, we extend a warm welcome to one and all. There is a pleasure in the pathless woods. There is a rapture on the lonely shore. There is society where none intrudes by the deep sea and music in its row. I love not man the less, but nature more. Scott Fitzgerald. Depletion of our environmental resources are not only a threat to our Mother Earth alone, they pose an immense threat to the survival of the human race itself. International Interdisciplinary Virtual Conference on Environmental Humanities, Relocating the Territories of Nature that we have just commenced is an attempt to tap on the theoretical, experiential, environmental perspectives from a multidisciplinary approach with a view to best utilize the available resources, best practices, effective interventions, creative ideas, cost-effective strategies, sustainable initiatives, impactful participatory methodologies, etc., to be better prepared to tackle the increasingly threatening, worsening, and indifferent, resigned acceptance of doomsday predictions being the norm. We are optimistic that all the participants of the two-day conference will acquire new skill and knowledge, and we would encourage all participants to take active part in the ensuing engaging discussions to be able to conclude certain policies we could engage in advocacy for, take home effective intervention strategies, and above all, be inspired to fight for environmentally sustainable lifestyle to become a reality, both for our own selves as well as the community we live in. On behalf of the organizing committee, a hearty welcome to one and all. As we raise our hearts in grateful praise for all the beauty that surrounds us, it is our desire that we learn to respect the natural resources as a sacred gift and do what we can to repair the damage we have caused through our consumerism, greed, and carelessness. Let us start the conference proceedings by invoking God's benign blessing on all of us. May the Lord, through this two-day conference, grant us an ecological conversion so that we can leave our next generation with a future full of hope where there is enough for all. May I request the revered Bishop of Trichy Tanjore Diocese, Chairman and Secretary, College Governing Council, Right Reverend Dr. D. Chandrasekharan Iyer, to lead us in the opening prayer.
Let us pray. Oh God, we thank you for this beautiful earth, our home, for the wide sky and the blessed sun, for the salt sea and the running water, for the everlasting hills and the never resting wind. Grant us a heart wide open to all this beauty. Heavenly Father, we thank you for Bishop Heber College, stands committed to the holistic approach to the life in its fullness. We thank you for the college. He is able to organize a virtual interdisciplinary conference, Environmental Humanities, Relocating the Territories of Nature, by reflecting upon the scenario that we find in the modern world, which is a threat to our lives. Heavenly Father, we live in an era of science and technology, but we fail to understand our relationship with nature. As we begin this conference, which will be for 2 days, we pray for your blessings upon us, O God. We especially pray for the speakers and the resource persons. Shower your greatest inspiration to all of them, that they may share their knowledge, heart and soul, to the respective topics. We thank you for the organizers, for their efforts that they have taken to give a very meaningful interpretation to the present lifestyle that we adopt. We thank you for the principal and the members of the faculty and the entire community of Bishop Heber College. We pray that you be with us, O God, and grant us your grace so that we may understand our own responsibility towards a sustainable environmental commitment that we should have. Be with us, O God, and give us your blessings. We give all honor and glory to your holy name. We pray and ask all these things in the name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you, Bishop Aya, for your fervent prayer. May we all execute this courage to take immediate action on the issues of environmental concern for the sake of all life.
We are pleased to look at your smiling faces virtually, though all of us would have preferred this to have happened in person. Today and tomorrow, we'll be deliberating together, sharing our expertise, listening to our colleagues from the varied disciplines of humanities, spending quality time, the outcome envisioned being some interesting learning for all of us, from all of us, of course. To extend a hearty welcome to each and every one of you, the experts of the two-day International Interdisciplinary Virtual Conference on Environmental Humanities, Relocating the Territories of Nature. We have amidst us Dr. S. Shobana, a versatile persona, known for a sense of confidence, has a presence, well presented, approachable and personable, someone who holds the own in front of any audience. I consider it an honor to welcome Dr. S. Shobana, Dean of Arts, Bishop Iba College, to deliver the welcome address.
Thank you, Dr. Shalini, for those nice words. Thank you, each and every one of you attending the conference, International Conference on Environmental Humanities, Relocating the Territories of Nature. On behalf of the college and the Deanery of Academics, particularly Humanities departments, I am very pleased to welcome those of you who've been with us for a long time now in the planning of this event, as well as those who have joined us today on Zoom to make your valuable contribution. The special invitees as speakers for today and tomorrow, and the paper presenters. Hearty welcome on behalf of the staff and students of the college and the student and teacher presenters from various colleges who are participating in the conference. Pleased to welcome amidst us Dr. Orin Gelderloos, the environmental activist and retired professor of environmental studies, University of Michigan, Dearborn, USA. His name is associated meaningfully with Ausable Institute of Environmental Studies, Michigan. And we are proud and we are grateful to him for starting the Ausable Heber Institute here at our college and his association with our college over 30 years now. Ambassadoring student-teacher exchange has been immense. And so with hearts full of gratitude, love, and great respect, we welcome Dr. Orin Gelderloos amidst us. I heartily welcome Dr. Andrew Speedy, Emeritus Fellow of Christ Church, Oxford, UK, and the retired FAO representative and senior officer in Animal Production Health Division, FAO Headquarters, Rome. Thank you very much for joining, Dr. Andrew Speedy. We look forward to listening from you too on environment and development. Greetings and welcome to Dr. Nirmal Selvamani, writer, eco-critic, former head and professor, Department of English, Madras Christian College, Chennai, and the Dean, School of Social Sciences and Humanities, Central University of Tamil Nadu, Thiruvarur, and his research in Thinai poetics paved the way for the introduction of eco-criticism as a paper in the colleges and universities of India. Sir, we eagerly await your lecture on the local eco-criticism. Hearty welcome. My very warm welcome to Mr. Theodore Bhaskaran, who retired as Postmaster General of Tamil Nadu what is nose for history in everything, Indian films or wildlife, has turned him a lifelong researcher and writer, and a wildlife conservationist also. His passion for writing has earned him the Golden Lotus Best Book on Cinema Award 1997. And he is also the winner of the Sanctuary Nature Foundation's Lifetime Service Award in 2020. Most welcome amidst us. Welcome to the forum, Dr. Arunachalam, Professor and Head, Department of Economics, Cochin University. Most welcome, sir. We are pleased and privileged to have all of you as expert speakers, and we look forward to learning a lot from you all. I heartily welcome Bishop and Chairman of the Governing Board of the College, Dr. Right Reverend Chandrasekharan Ayya, who's been a source of motivation and encouragement all along. Thank you, Ayya, for your goodwill towards the college and the deanery in making time to participate in the event. Warm greetings to our beloved principal, Paul Dayabaran, sir. Thank you, sir, for your unrelenting guidance and support, especially when we set out on such a venture of conducting academic conferences, endeavors. Warm welcome to all professors who have joined online too, vice principals, deans of Bishop Heber College, and others from various colleges and universities. We've all been eager to be a part of this endeavor due to a mutual passion for environmental concern and the imminence of humanitarian response. Today, there is a strange challenge before us. The unprecedented technological capabilities coupled with unlimited human creativity has given us incredible power to take on intractable problems such as poverty, unemployment, disease, and environmental degradation. Our task is to translate this potential into meaningful transformation, but that is getting delayed and hampered too. Sometimes it's because of the divide, which is very conventional, age-long divide between disciplines, humanities and sciences, divide between the Western, the Eastern, indigenous ways of relating to the natural world, and divide between nature and culture. And hence, we thought of this kind of an affair where interdisciplinariness can bring about a solution to such a great challenge. So the happy marriage that have emerged in the humanities over the past several decades, in particular environmental literature, environmental philosophy, environmental history, science, technology, environmental anthropology, and all these such happy marriages helps us to deal with such humanistic questions about ontology, meaning of existence, culture, values, ethics, and responsibilities to address pressing environmental vis-a-vis economic problems. So the two-day conference, its purpose is to promote different learning initiatives through planned lectures to be given by distinguished experts in their own respective fields, and special discussions and conferences in the form of paper discussions, paper presentations and discussions to follow, where the paper presenters will be able to add their views. And this is a very special appeal request to the paper presenters. The delegates, you can so comfortably and amply add your views to the conference. I hope these exercises will help you to have a productive time in the 2 days and to grow to be more fecund and creative in future. And so most welcome the delegates for the most important young generation who await to be benefited from this conference. Thank you one and all, and most welcome one and all.
Thanks a lot, ma'am, from the bottom of our heart for your warm words of welcome.
The two-day international interdisciplinary virtual conference on environmental humanities, Relocating the Territories of Nature, represents an occasion of international interest that is addressed to not only the environmentalists, but also to the professionals from connection domains, who by their contributions may provide a multidisciplinary intervention framework to tackle environmental degradation that is plaguing the global population. Now let us have the pleasure of listening to our Chief Patron, Chairman and Secretary of a College Governing Council and Bishop of Trichy Tanjore Diocese, Right Reverend Dr. D. Chandrasekharan Iyer. It is indeed a privilege to have got the opportunity to lend a ears to an erudite scholar, spiritual leader, blessed with the humane persona with deep-rooted commitment for facilitating many a social and environmental causes. To help us dwell deep into the focal area of the conference, may I request the revered Bishop of Trichy Tanjore Diocese, Chairman and Secretary, College Governing Council, Right Reverend Dr. D. Chandrasekharan Iyer, to present the introductory remarks and offer his felicitations.
Dear friends, it gives me immense pleasure to say a few words of introductory remarks about the wonderful conference that you organized by the Deaneries of Arts. At the outset, I would like to congratulate the Dean of Arts and the Associate Dean of Arts for taking a lot of efforts to organize this 2 days virtual conference on a very interesting, very useful, very thought-provoking theme, topic, which will be very useful for the present society. At the outset, I am so touched by the way you have approached the entire environmental issue as an interdisciplinary approach. That's a very good thing. I appreciate your efforts, because the environmental issues include a lot of facts, a lot of areas to be covered by our research. Particularly, as our Dean has already pointed out, it includes economics, social, culture, language, and all these things are added. And since we have to have a interdisciplinary approach to the entire issue of environmental challenges that we confront today, so I would like to really appreciate the focus that you have made in this conference. Secondly, I am also very much interested in the environmental issues, as I am basically a student of ethics. Ethics is an interdisciplinary subject. We learn a lot of things, and particularly the ethical approach to the entire environmental issue is the issue of justice. Because that is, we are very blind to see this important, vital aspect in dealing with the environmental issues. I'm very happy that you have made a very good effort by giving opportunity to contribute from various areas of thoughts. And I'm very happy, and I congratulate the efforts taken by the Deaneries of Art. And again, as we go through, I think I'll come to you a little later. As we really look into the present environmental issues, we have to have a holistic approach to the entire society, because of course, we all believe in God, we have religion, we have faith and creed, so many other things are there. But however, the holistic approach will give us a new insight to solve the environmental issues. So I'm very happy, and also I congratulate the principal also for making this conference possible. And another important thing what I would like to highlight is, we live in an era of science and technology, which has created problem to the environment. That is another challenge. So one hand, we have to live with the science and technology, and the other, we have to challenge the science and technology. So these are the challenges that we confront as we look into the environmental issues. And I'm sure this 2 days meeting will really give us some kind of insight to solve, at least to find out the kind of approach that we should have when we look at the environmental issues. So I take this opportunity and I give my best wishes to all the scholars, those who are going to give us their thoughts. And I pray and I invoke God's blessings. May God shower his inspiration upon the speakers so that they can give their best of their knowledge, soul and heart, to understand the reality of nature in connection with the human society. So I congratulate the entire team for organizing this 2 days virtual conference. And the theme is very interesting, relocating the territories of nature, which obviously tells us the kind of relationship that we should have with nature. That's a very important focus. Unless this relationship is identified, and if there is any problem, it should be rectified. If there is anything to be developed, that we have to make an attempt. With these words, I conclude, and I wish all the best for all those who are participating. May God continue to help us to understand the real situation, to where we have to jointly work together for a better society in the days to come. Thank you very much. God bless you.
Thank you, our revered Bishop Ayya. That was an enlightening presentation indeed that helped us to understand the thought process behind the conference theme and the sub-themes.
Dr. D. Paul Deabrin, the president of today's inaugural ceremony, advocates that the foremost condition to be upheld to experience unconditional happiness is that the link between man and nature is cherished, nourished, and not quelled. Our beloved principal, Dr. D. Paul Deabrin, is known for his uncanny ability to translate the vision of our institution into reality with ease, elan, and efficiency. Through his humane approach, sober is synonym of his own self, maintaining equanimity, environmental sensitivity, and equity in educational service delivery. Now allow us to invite the president of today's inaugural ceremony, Dr. D. Paul Deabrin, to deliver his inaugural address.
Esteemed and revered Bishop Ayya, the Secretary and Chairman of our college, the dear Dean of Arts, Dr. Shobana, the convener of this useful 2-day international virtual conference, beloved co-conveners, beloved organizing secretaries, beloved bursar of the college, learned colleagues who are seated here, colleagues who are on online, esteemed resource persons, Dr. Andrew Speedy, Emeritus Fellow of Christchurch, Oxford, UK, respected Dr. Theodore Boscawen, former Postmaster General, an illustrious writer, historian, and wildlife conservationist, esteemed other resource persons, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My warm greetings to all of you. It's a great joy and privilege for me to associate with all of you, along with our revered Bishop Ayya, as you inaugurate this 2-day international conference on virtual mode on the topic Environmental Humanities, Relocating the Territories of Nature. First of all, I appreciate and congratulate the convener, Dr. Shobana, the Dean of Arts, the co-conveners, and the organizing secretaries, and each and everyone who is instrumental for this to happen in our campus virtually for the benefit of the humanity. Dear friends, I know how difficult it is to organize a conference of this kind, but due to the pandemic, we evolved a new strategy of meeting each other, sharing each other through webinar, through Zoom. And normally those days, when you organize an international conference, by sitting in India, inviting people from US, UK, and other nations is very difficult. Physically, they have to come and they have to deliver. And all of us know, some of our colleagues, some of our past students are doing extremely well in other nations. Whenever they come down to India on vacation, we make use of them and we used to organize international conferences. But now we're able to connect each and everyone around the globe through online, through Zoom or through Google Classroom, different kinds of online platforms. So dear, that is how I always used to say, in life, we always come across in hurdles, or you can say challenges. So when we tackle challenges, we always grow. When we apply ourselves by His grace, definitely we can overcome all the hurdles, all the predicaments, and we can excel in life. Once again, appreciate and congratulate. Bishop, I also stated that you organized this conference on a useful topic, connecting in our college all the humanities and sciences together. People used to say science and technology are the two eyes of any nation, any developing nation. But these days, we must have a holistic thing. I'm glad that humanities initiated a conference of this kind. Maybe it's first of its kind, maybe international level. I'm sure, just now I was talking with the organizing secretary, Dr. Shanti said, she said that as many as 90 presenters are going to present in these 2 days. And we have nicely planned out. We have 4 special addresses along with one valedictory special address, and united 2 persons, one each from UK and US, our friends, and other 2 from India. Expertise from within India as well as outside India. And definitely these 2 days will be memorable for all the participants. Dear friends, if you refer the book of Genesis, chapter 2, verse 15, it conveys, God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to take care of it. So dear friends, it is the primary duty for all of us. It's a demonstration by the Lord in the beginning itself. So we have to enjoy this world. And we have to take care of this world. We may belong to the life discipline, we may belong to life sciences, or we belong to basic sciences, or maybe belong to computational sciences, or maybe belong to pure arts, humanities. Whatever be the discipline, irrespective of the discipline, as a Bishop Aya said, we must have a holistic mind. All of us know India's beauty is its diversity. Not only in terms of the people spread from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, but also the land, isn't it? We have got all kinds of stuff. Is it okay? One of the beautiful tropical nations of the world. We have our own ecological system. So dear friends, at this juncture, of course, we have illustrious speakers amidst us. They are going to brief, they are going to elaborate on different topics. I am sure these 2 days will be memorable for all the participants, the entire community of Bishop Weber College. So once again, I appreciate and congratulate Dr. Shobana, the convener, Dean of Arts, and the co-conveners, and each and everyone who is responsible for this event to happen. I am sure we'll be having a blessed time and useful time. Of course, we are going to commence by God's grace. We have come out of the pandemic. We must thank God. Probably, as we plan, we may start the online classes for senior students, maybe after mid of July. By God willing, we may begin the first year undergraduate classes from August 1st week onwards. So before that, we feel like if we conduct this kind of events, it will encourage us, it will mold us, it will shape us, it will put us in the right frame of mind to meet our dear students. Thank you so much. All the best. God bless you all.
Thanks a lot, sir, for giving your invaluable insights on protecting our environment through sustainable initiatives.
If we have to sum up the power of nature in a sentence, we might probably say nature is full of infinite causes that have never occurred in experience. That implies the scope, in fact, rather the lack of a boundary within which the scope of nature can be confined to. Yet relocating the territories of nature that has been encroached to the best of human knowledge is imperative in an endeavor to enable the next generation to experience the infinite joy ingrained in nature, knowing fully well that we don't inherit the earth from our ancestors, but rather borrow it from our children. To drive home this important tenet and facilitate us to dwell deep on the need to have a holistic approach to green systems, here comes the much awaited special address 1 of the 2-day International Interdisciplinary Virtual Conference on Environmental Humanities, Relocating the Territories of Nature, to be delivered by Dr. Andrew Speedy, Emeritus Student Fellow of Christ Church, Oxford, UK. It's over to Dr. K. Shanti, ma'am, a scholarly, soft-spoken yet effective communicator, a keen observer, and a person extraordinary in terms of the belief she has in herself, to introduce the speaker of the first special address. Over to Dr. Shanti, ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Shalini. Respected Bishop Iyer, respected Principal Sir, the Dean of Arts, and respected Barzar Sir, and the other deans, and the fellow colleagues, and the participants of the seminar, ladies and gentlemen, I extend to each one of you my cordial greetings and a warm welcome to the two-day International Virtual Conference on Environmental Humanities, Relocating the Territories of Nature. The theme of the conference inaugurates an exciting new series of deliberations on environmental philosophy, imagination, crisis, ethics, economy, management, sociology, literature, and writings. One of the enormous and complex areas to explore as it breaks down disciplinary boundaries and draws attention to interdisciplinary approaches of newer and more practical insights on today's environmental issues. Initiating concern over the environment, the premise of the conference converges on helping us to understand the interface between the human and the non-human worlds, as well as the sentient and the non-sentient on ecological and ideological lines, inviting fresh interpretations to address pressing environmental concerns. This conference calls for a rethinking on political, social, cultural, and scientific manifestos that stifle nature in order to realign the priorities of man and to revive a symbiotic relationship with nature. The premise of the conference converges on helping us understand the interface between the human and the non-human worlds, as well as the ideological forms of our thinking and the interpretation to address the pressing environmental issues. It is now my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Andrew William Speedy, our first distinguished guest speaker for the conference. Dr. Andrew William Speedy graduated with an MA and PhD from the University of Cambridge, UK, and spent 9 years in agricultural research, teaching, and extension in Scotland. He was lecturer in agricultural science at the University of Oxford and tutor in biological sciences at Christ Church from 1981 to 1998. In 2001, he was elected an Emeritus Student Fellow of Christ Church, Oxford. In 2005, he was made a visiting professor at the Royal Agricultural University, Cirencester, UK. Dr. Andrew Speedy was a Food and Agriculture Organization of UN's representative to Vietnam. He came in 2006 from FAO headquarters in Rome, where he was a senior officer in the Animal Production and Health Division since 1998. He worked in Africa, Asia, Europe, and Latin America. He retired in June 2010. He is a specialist in the following fields of knowledge and profession: international development, project management and supervision, animal production and health, crop production, food safety, nutrition and food security, biology, ecology, experimental design and statistics, information and knowledge management and computing. To list out some of the remarkable milestones in his career, he had been a consultant and chair of judges for the farming by satellite competition of the European GNSS Agency and Helios Technology. He has given many invited lectures at the International Rural Development Royal Agricultural University, Cirencester, UK, on global issues. He has been the support evaluator for CGIAR research program on livestock and fish. He has been a lead, he has played a real load in the technical review and report of research projects of the International Livestock Research Institute and partner institutions in Ethiopia, Tanzania, Uganda, and Egypt, India, Nicaragua, and Vietnam. He has served as a technical, really important person and worked with Asian Development Bank. He had been an international coordinator trade facilitation, and he has improved sanitary and phytosanitary handling of the greater Mekong subregion. He was a consultant in outreach communications and reporting and communications consultant for the terminal reports and statements submitted to the governments. He was an international expert team leader of Food and Agricultural Organization of the UN to Vietnam. He was an international animal health and production consultant, the team leader of FAO Cambodia. So this project was to assist Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries, the Department of Animal Health and Production, to formulate the national policy and strategy on livestock production for Cambodia. This involved a review of existing policies and strategies related to agriculture. He had been the head of the mission of FAO representative in Vietnam, and he was one of the senior officers in the Feed and Animal Nutrition, FAO Animal Production Health Division for Rome, planning, budgeting, and implementation of FAO regular program activities in animal feed, food safety, and application of quality control along the table-to-table process. He has been an information and communication expert organizing major international conferences, expert consultations, workshops, and training activities, technical cooperation projects, and government cooperative projects. He has been on such missions to Brazil, Cambodia, Cameroon, China, Cuba, Czech Republic, Denmark, Egypt, Ethiopia, France, Germany, Hungary, India, Lebanon, Malaysia, Namibia, Romania, Serbia, Sweden, Switzerland, Tanzania, Thailand, Tunisia, UK, USA, Venezuela, Vietnam, and Zimbabwe. He has held various positions in his teaching career at Christ Church, Oxford. He has been the chairman of examiners at various stages. He has been the coordinator of Oxford University admissions, director of the University of Farm, member of Farm Management Panel, member of the governing board of Christ Church. He has been the senior specialist advisor, East of Scotland, College of Agriculture, Edinburgh. He's been a specialist advisor for ESCA Research, Teaching and Extension. He has been the principal investigator of almost 44 FAO Vietnam projects. He has delivered more than 30 speeches at public events related to his field of expertise. He has taken part in more than 15 international activities from 75 to 98. He has presented 26 papers at the meetings and conferences. He has had more than 30 scientific publications and numerous conference proceedings and 4 books. He had undertaken editorial responsibilities, and he has been an editor of 4 journals. Now, Dr. Andrew William Speedy lives in Pennsylvania, USA, and we are greatly honored to have Dr. Andrew William Speedy to present the first plenary talk of our international conference on the topic, Green Systems, a Holistic Approach. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Andrew William Speedy. Welcome you, sir. Over to you now.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. Yes? I see people nodding, so that's good. Bishop Chandrasekhar, the chairman and secretary of Bishop Heber College, Dr. Paul Draya-Baran, the principal, Dr. Shobana, the Dean of Arts, and Dr. Shanti, the Associate Dean, and I would like to thank you for that very long and complimentary introduction. It's certainly a pleasure to take part in this meeting. I know Trichy very well. My wife is from Trichy. My brother-in-law, of course, was a dean at the college. My father-in-law still lives in Trichy, so I know the place very well. We try to go there every year, but of course the pandemic has prevented that in the last year. So it's all the more pleasing that at least I'm able to take part in this meeting and be with you this morning. It's certainly a challenge. Your concept note, and Dr. Shanti has just enumerated the points that you want to make. You want to cover the environment, philosophy, ethics, economics, management, sociology, and literature. You want to talk about breaking down the boundaries of disciplines and to develop a multi or interdisciplinary approach to gain more practical insights on today's environmental issues. And in your concept note, you call for a rethinking on the political, social, cultural, and scientific manifestos that stifle nature in order to realign the priorities of man and to revive a symbiotic relationship with nature. So it's a pretty tall order. I chose the title Green Systems, a Holistic Approach, because I believe we must take a systems approach to the issues that embrace many factors, physical, biological, economic, and political, in order to understand the interactions. I will take a whole Earth approach, break it down into subsystems and attempt to place these in an economic and political context that may possibly offer solutions. I'm going to now share my screen and show some PowerPoint slides. I hope that, is that okay? You could see that? We probably need to remove the spotlight from, no, I can't do that, but I hope that's big enough for you to see. This is the view of planet Earth known as the Blue Marble. It was a photograph taken on December the 7th, 1972, from a distance of about 29,000 kilometers from the planet's surface by the crew of Apollo 17 on its way to the moon. Now, I always have to click here rather than, yes. A view of the whole Earth as a living organism was the proposal of the luminary James Lovelock in his so-called Gaia Hypothesis, which he published in this book in 1979. James Lovelock is now 101 years old, and he's a great scientist who has done many things. He did practical things like inventing an electron capture detector, which was able to measure very small quantities of chemicals like CDCs in the atmosphere, which he did more or less in his back garden laboratory. He also worked at NASA and a number of other things, and he's still going strong at 101. Lovelock and Margulis proposed that Gaia is and I move on to the next one. Gaia is a complex entity involving the Earth's biosphere, atmosphere, oceans, and soil, the totality constituting a feedback or cybernetic system which seeks an optimal physical and chemical environment for life on this planet. The maintenance of conditions on Earth may be conveniently described by the term homeostasis. The Gaia hypothesis proposes that living organisms interact with their inorganic surroundings on Earth to form a synergistic and self-regulating complex system that helps to maintain and perpetuate the conditions for life on the planet. So that was what he described. And you would think, sorry, I'm not going to go there yet, just a moment. He proposed that it was that more or less that it was the Earth is a super organism. And you'd think that there was a useful way to understand the complexity of Earth systems. And although the book was popular and enthusiastically received by environmentalists and the Green Movement, it received surprising vitriolic criticism from the scientific community, notably the biologists John Maynard Smith, Richard May, Stephen Jay Gould, and Richard Dawkins in Oxford, and Ford Doolittle in the United States. How could he claim that the Earth was an organism? It did not reproduce, it had not evolved, and there was no fossil record of dead planets. In defense, there is a very good book by Michael Ruse, published in 2013, which is actually the title is the Gaia hypothesis science on a pagan planet. I missed out the bit about the Gaia hypothesis in the slide, but this is in which he defends Lovelock's hypothesis on the grounds that it is at least a metaphor, and there's nothing wrong with a metaphor as a scientific debate. So anyway, that's James Lovelock's contribution, and one of the important things that he demonstrated were a number of apparent regulatory systems, notably the behavior of phytoplankton in the oceans that respond to increased temperature and solar radiation by increasing production of sulfides, first in seawater and then in the atmosphere. These sulfides form sulfur dioxide, and this leads to the production of sulfate aerosols and an increased cloud cover, leading to greater reflection of the sun's rays and reduced solar radiation. So you've got a feedback loop which can operate in both directions, so that as solar energy increased, so did the production of these sulfate aerosols, increased cloud cover, which reduced solar radiation, and therefore, again, there was a reduction in cloud cover. So this system worked to manage the amount of solar energy reaching the Earth. It's known as the claw hypothesis after the first initials of the four authors, Charlson, Lovelock, Andre, and Warren. He also presented models, notably one called Daisy World, in which there were black and white daisies, which changed according to changes in temperature and the atmosphere. So he's also, there he is again, I'm showing him a second time, go on to his follow-up books, because he followed up, the first book was published in 1979, and notable was his book in 2006, which is called The Revenge of Gaia, in which he noted that instead of providing negative feedback of the climate systems, some of these systems might actually start, in fact, to further increase global warming, increasing the temperature, which would result in stratifying of the world oceans, decrease in the supply of nutrients from the ocean to its euphotic zone, and subsequently phytoplankton activity will decline. And the consequence of this will be further climate warming, may even lead to less sulfide production, and hence, if you like, a chain reaction increasing further global warming. So he was well aware of the possibility that this self-regulation of the Earth as an organism was beginning to fall apart, and in fact, gradually Gaia was turning into was going wrong, and we were seeing things that changed our life on Earth. Climate change was first talked about in the early, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment so you could see my face again. I have to spotlight myself probably. Okay, there's so you can see my face. Climate change was first talked about in the early 19th century. It was actually Joseph Fourier in 1824 who first talked about the atmospheric greenhouse effect. And in 1860, John Tyndall quantified the effects by laboratory experiments, the effects of greenhouse gases on the absorption of infrared radiation. And Svante Arrhenius in Sweden in 1896, interestingly, an ancestor of Greta Tunberg, the young climate activist, he showed that coal burning could cause global warming. So way back in the 19th century, it was well understood that particularly carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, as well as water vapor and methane and nitrous oxide, were leading to changes in temperature and therefore a gradual warming of the atmosphere. I'll go back to sharing my screen again, because I'm not going to dwell long on the science of climate change. I hope that many people are aware of it, but just to highlight the key points. This is the well-known Keeling Curve from the Mauna Loa Observatory, which shows the increase in carbon dioxide from in the last 40 years. If I go on, sorry, I always have to click rather than push. I want to show, sorry, I'm not showing the earlier days, but carbon dioxide has increased from about 250 parts per million in 1750, the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, up to about over 400 parts per million, about 420 parts per million now in 2020, 2021. This is a dramatic increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It's a relatively small element in the atmosphere, but it has a rather major effect on the absorption of radiation and the reflection of heat back to Earth. So it's well understood that carbon dioxide is one of the main greenhouse gases, along, as I say, with water vapor and methane and other things. And in turn, this is responsible for desertification, for loss of polar ice and glaciers, for sea level rise and extreme weather events. And you could say that this is the first destructive effect of man, to which we can also add the loss of biodiversity, the accumulation of plastics, widespread chemical pollution, and poor air quality. Here is temperature rise over the last 2,000 years. For millions of years, there were major shifts in temperature affecting the Earth until the end of the Ice Age. But it was about 11,700 years ago, at the start of the Holocene, and since then, the atmosphere and the biosphere have remained remarkably stable, and the systems can be said to be in equilibrium and self-regulating, possibly due to, apparently, to the unusual circular orbit of the Earth around the Sun. And this stable situation was set to continue for probably another 50,000 years until the beginning of the industrial age about 170 years ago. And we can see this dramatic, it's called a hockey stick, rise in temperature just in those last 170 years. So, and I think we look particularly at this period, this is from 1860 to 2020, you can see that that global temperatures have risen by at least 1 degree Celsius over that period. Now that may not seem a lot, but of course we're beginning to see the real impacts of only 1 degree. And it looks as if this is increasing exponentially, such that if we get to 1.5 or 2 degrees or more, the effects could be very serious and devastating. The effects of man probably started, as I say, a long time ago, perhaps 15,000 years ago, but it's this recent period since 1750 that things are really bad. I copied a graph from a book by Dirk Philipson in 2015. It's probably rather difficult for you to see, but of course it will eventually be perhaps published in the paper, but it shows all the things that are increasing at the same time. On the right-hand side, carbon dioxide is increasing, nitrous oxide is increasing, methane is increasing, and ozone is increasing. We've seen surface temperature increasing, the acidification of the ocean increasing, and at the same time we've seen the loss of tropical forests, the increase in agricultural land, and the degradation of the terrestrial biosphere. This has all been associated with a rise in population, The population when I was born was about, I think about 3 billion or 2.5 or 3 billion people, and is now 7.5 billion or more. Of course, that may not be altogether a bad thing, because we've seen a great increase in wealth and the economy over that period. But nevertheless, this has also led to increases in energy use, increases in fertilizer use, increases in water use particularly, which is becoming critical in many countries, increase in transportation. We now fly everywhere and all have motor vehicles and have international tourism. So all these things have happened during the time that man has been here in the last few hundred years. So I'm going to show the various Earth systems, and we talk about the atmosphere, the cryosphere, the ice, the Arctic and Antarctic areas, the biosphere, our animal and plant life, the soils and geology, and the geosphere, and the hydrosphere, the oceans. But to this you can add the anthroposphere, that is man and the effects of man. Caroli Henrik in 2002 has described the anthroposphere as behaving metaphorically like a predator or a tumor or a parasite on the biosphere in its host. So I show this slide of man actually really having a detrimental parasitic effect on the rest of the systems. And we have to consider whether actually this has now gone too far and beginning to affect our not only our environment, our biodiversity, but also, in fact, our economic well-being. And I'm going to introduce here another character, another person in the story, Kenneth Bolding. And I want to introduce him as an economist. You may know him for his famous quote, which was used by David Attenborough at the bottom of this screen, which is that anyone who believes exponential growth can go on forever in a finite world is either a madman or an economist. And I think this, coming from an economist, was a very telling comment on the present situation. He was, as well as an economist, an educator, a peace activist. He was a Quaker, in fact, an interdisciplinary philosopher. In his review of Denis Pirage, The Ecological Perspective and the Social Sciences, he said, "It can hardly be denied that the Earth at any stage of its development can be regarded as a total system." I'm going to stop my share again, and I'm going to highlight myself. No, I'm not. I'm going to remove it here. Now I'm okay. Now you can see me again. Yes, he said, "It can hardly be denied that Earth at any stage of its development can be regarded as a total system. Some aspects of it, however, are more total than others. The atmosphere today certainly behaves as a single system and always has. The oceans are less of a total system. There are very different ecosystems, for example, between the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans and the Indian Ocean. So there are quite big differences in the oceanic systems. And in particular, the biosphere is much more localized. Indeed, it has been the isolation of the biosphere into a very large number of relatively self-contained ecosystems. And these various ecosystems are divided by oceans, mountains, islands, and continents. And here again, I'm going to jump back to the shared screen and go on. One more. This is a list of the vulnerable ecosystems of which we should be now concerned, particularly tropical forests, coral reefs, mangroves, wetlands, other sorts of forests, grasslands, island communities, wetlands and peatlands, and of course the polar ecosystems, amongst others. Bolding said that in the last 500 years, with the rise of science and of science-based technology, the old barriers to migration have broken down. Humans are everywhere, mammals are everywhere, rabbits are in Australia, kangaroos in zoos all over the world, automobiles are everywhere, skyscrapers are nearly everywhere, books and movies, television and radio are everywhere. And perhaps for the first time in history, the Earth is in real danger of becoming a single system, both biological and in terms of human culture and of artifacts. This is potentially very dangerous. If there are very many isolated systems, one can go wrong without the others going wrong. If there is only one system, then if anything goes wrong, that is the end of it. The destruction of ecosystems does not only, stop my share again. So it keeps popping up other people. There we go. The destruction of ecosystems does not only have an impact on natural resources and biodiversity, but has a direct impact on climate and the future of mankind. Carbon sequestration, that is the removal of CO2 from the atmosphere, occurs in the oceans, the soil, peatlands, grasslands, and especially forests. Hence, there is a particular concern for the removal and destruction of the Amazon rainforest and other tropical forests. Simon Lewis produced a very good paper with a large number of other authors, in which he states structurally intact tropical forests sequestered about half of they sequester about half of the global terrestrial carbon uptake over the 1990s and early 2000s, removing about 15% of anthropogenic carbon dioxide emissions. In this paper, they assessed changes in carbon sequestration using 244 structurally intact African tropical forests spanning 11 countries, comparing them with 321 published plots from Amazonia, which was an incredible multi-institution global study. In recent years, and under the influence of climate change and global warming, and with peak growth and tree losses, they have found that forests themselves have begun to move from net carbon sinks to carbon emitters. And the trend is happening most rapidly in Amazonia, but also beginning in Africa and elsewhere. It's a further worrying example of the reversal of self-regulation and the carbon cycle feedback loop. And as, if you like, a tipping point in which carbon is now coming out of the forest instead of being held in it. So the state of the Amazon forest can be seen as a tipping point as it changes from CO2 sink to CO2 emitter. There are other examples: warming of the oceans, acidification of the oceans, and so on, as which I've already mentioned, is another tipping point that can, if you like, accelerate the effects of climate change and accelerate the damage that is occurring to our ecosystems. It's particularly accentuated in the polar regions, where the reduction in sea ice means less reflection of solar radiation and greater warming, which is a further tipping point. Moving on from the science, the political discussion on climate change has taken place under the auspices of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or the UNFCCC. The UNFCCC has 197 members known as parties, and they organize regular meetings known as the Conference of Parties, or COP. This has led in 1997 to the Kyoto Protocol at COP3, and ultimately to the 2015 Paris Agreement at COP21. The main aim of the Paris Agreement is to keep the global average temperature rise this century as close as possible to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. The ultimate objectives of these agreements is to stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere at a level that will prevent dangerous human interference with the climate system in a time frame which allows ecosystems to adapt naturally and enable sustainable development. So countries have agreed to target reductions in emissions which vary between developed and developing countries. And here I will go back again. You can see here the various targets to which countries have agreed. The EU will cut emissions by 40% by 2030 compared to 1990. The USA will cut emissions by 28%, or pledge to cut emissions by 28% by 2025 compared to 2005. Of course, the USA withdrew from the Paris Agreement under the previous administration of President Trump, but the current administration has now rejoined under President Biden and is once again committed to these reductions in emissions. China agreed or pledged to cut emissions by 60 to 65% per unit of GDP from their 2005 levels by 2030, and India 33 to 35% by 2030 compared to 2005. So these are the promises. The next question is whether these, how this will be achieved. I think I will stay with my slides and go on. The United Nations has tried to put together these some goals for this purpose, known as the Sustainable Development Goals, which were published in 2015. These had evolved from 8 Millennium Development Goals in the year 2000, and they now comprise 17 goals with numerous targets, events, publications, and hundreds of actions relating to poverty, hunger, health, education, gender equality, water and sanitation, energy, work and economic growth, industry, innovation, infrastructure, inequality, cities, consumption and production, climate, aquatic life, terrestrial life, institutions and partnerships. And while this is laudable, these hundreds of actions do not constitute a clearly defined and workable system for a green economy. To me, it seems very much like every UN agency, of which there are about 16 to 20, all wanted their part of the Sustainable Development Goals. And so you have so many hundreds and hundreds of ideas there without a clear and simple definition of what really needs to be done. To achieve a sustainability through a circular or green economy demands firstly that the major sources of environmental degradation and carbon emissions are abolished. Comparative carbon emissions and carbon footprints are given in a rather good book, which I like particularly. It's called How Bad Are Bananas? This book was written, I think it's 2010, published in 2010, and it was written by Mike Berners-Lee. You might recognize the name. He is the brother of Tim Berners-Lee, who was the person first responsible for the World Wide Web. And he puts in this book, and the reason for the title is that one of the things to look at is how much, what's the carbon footprint of bananas being shipped from tropical countries to Europe, for example, in a boat. And actually they're not too bad because they're not refrigerated and they go by sea and not by plane. So bananas are not actually all that bad in terms of their carbon footprint. But he puts together, he puts into categories from 0 to 1 million tons of carbon based on the whole system. And the worst culprits, of course, are fossil fuels, oil, coal and gas, black carbon, pollution, deforestation, air travel, transportation, and the manufacture of items such as cars, houses, and infrastructure, including power generation equipment. That's renewable as well as non-renewable. If you can have renewable sources of power generation, but of course they do have a carbon footprint in their manufacture. The manufacture of wind turbines or of any kind of power station has itself an energy cost and a carbon cost. So the upshot of all this really is that I'm gonna come out again on stop my share again. So that was fairly easy. The one clear lesson is that the use of fossil fuels simply has to stop. Each year, 5.5 billion tons of carbon is released by burning fossil fuels. Of this massive amount, 3.3 billion tons stays in the atmosphere. Most of the remainder becomes dissolved in seawater. And we have to stop depleting, and we also have to stop depleting natural and mineral resources. And this demands that the materials used by industry, agriculture, and households are efficiently recycled. So that's the message. We have to stop fossil fuel use, and we have to recycle our use of mineral and other resources, including natural resources. So the circular economy is one that embodies sustainability, responsible consumption, reduction of waste, and recycling. And here I'm going to go back to the character that I had spoken about already, and that is, and move on. Oh, I have to click. There we go. To Kenneth Bolding in 1966 in his paper, The Economics of the Coming Spaceship Earth, in which he first used the term circular economy. And he said that the economy as we know it today was like a, oops, sorry, that's because I'm leaning on my keyboard, that was the problem. The closed earth of the future requires economic principles that are somewhat different from those of the open earth of the past. Bolding calls the present economy the cowboy economy, the cowboy being symbolic of the illimitable plains and also associated with reckless, exploitative, romantic, and violent behavior, which is characteristic of open societies. The closed economy of the future might, in this slide, I show the economic system with energy going in, with fossil fuels, loss of heat, and a large amount of waste. The economy of the future might be called a spaceman economy or spaceship economy, in which the Earth has become a single spaceship without unlimited reservoirs of anything, either for extraction or for pollution, and in which, therefore, man must find his place in a cyclical ecological system, which is capable of continuous reproduction of material from form, even though it cannot escape having inputs of energy. So the idea is that everything, just like being in a spaceship, you can't get anything in and you can't push anything out. So you have to be self-dependent within this spaceship Earth that is going forwards. Economists currently measure success in terms of gross national product or gross national or gross domestic product. The two things are related, of course. Gross national product is like gross domestic product, but includes also foreign income, or overseas income, if you like. But Bolding suggests that it should be possible, however, to distinguish the part of the GNP which is derived from exhaustible resources and that which is derived from renewable resources, whereas that part of consumption which represents waste and that which represents input into a productive system again. So even back in 1966, Bolding was suggesting how we might go forward. I want to introduce another character now, and with somebody who perhaps has a more recent description of a new economic and social principles, and that is Kate Rayworth in her recent book known as The Donut Economy. in 2017. Dr. Rayworth is a senior associate at Oxford University's Environmental Change Institute and a professor of practice at Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences. She describes herself as a renegade economist focused on making economics fit for 21st century realities. She is the creator of the Donut of Social and Planetary Boundaries and co-founder of the Donut Economics Action Lab. And that's her book, Donut Economics, 7 Ways to Think Like a 20th Century Economist. So here is the idea of the donut. Her first chapter is entitled, Change the Goal from GDP to the Donut. The donut of social and planetary boundaries is a simple visualization of the dual conditions, social and ecological, that underpin collective human well-being. So the social foundation demarks the donut's inner boundary and sets out the basics of life on which no one should be left falling short. So that's, you can see, water, food, health, education, work, peace and justice, a political voice, social equity, gender equality, housing, and so on. And these are all the social foundations to which everyone should have equal right. The ecological ceiling comprises the 9 planetary boundaries of climate change, ocean acidification, chemical pollution, nitrogen and phosphorus loading, freshwater withdrawals, use of water that is, land conversion, biodiversity loss, air pollution, and ozone layer depletion. And this is what we see in the present situation. We have, within the thing, we have as falling short in our social foundation, particularly in areas like water, still, although it's improved a lot in food, we certainly are polluting our waters with nitrogen and phosphorus. We are losing forests through land conversion, particularly, of course, in the Amazon rainforest, and we're greatly losing biodiversity all around the world. So this is showing how we've got to somehow go from this situation, and I'm going to go backwards, to this situation in which humanity lives within the safe and just space between our social foundation and our ecological ceiling. So I think it's a very good description of what needs to be done, and shows the number of areas of a number of disciplines involved in trying to achieve these things. And despite the policy declarations of governments and the Paris Agreement, the hurdles to achieving this objective are massive. We have to consider the oil and gas industry, agriculture, construction, manufacture, the automotive industry, and even perhaps information technology and data industries. The world use of computers, the internet, is not without its own use of energy and a serious carbon footprint. This must change within the next few years if the target of 0 carbon and 1.5 degrees temperature rise are to be realized. Going to go on. In my own teaching of sustainable international development, I've used a diagram of the modern economy that looks something like this. And this is perhaps, I don't know whether it's a particularly good representation, but this is something that I suppose everybody's familiar with. In the center is this market economy with consumers. It's supplied by forestry and agriculture in the form of food. Agriculture itself supplies labor, which moves from traditional farming into manufacturing. Manufacturing supplies goods and materials to the consumers. And of course, manufacturing gets its raw materials by mining and oil extraction. And of course, an important further sector these days is the service sector, which itself has an economic contribution to make and a demand to make on the system. And government, of course, operates the public sector, which also provides for the people and receives taxes in order to do this. Also, you see there the banks and credit, which supplies the finance for all this functioning of the economy. And you see real estate, which is another where funds also go in the system, and exports which go out of the economy. I usually go on to show this, which is a slightly more elaborate version of the same diagram, and brings in the influence of global companies, which have a major effect, and of global finance, things like hedge funds and futures and derivatives. And you can see that, if you like, profit is being sucked out of the economy particularly towards the global finance and global the banks and the global companies that now have such a major influence. And these also frequently escape current systems of taxation and hence accountability, unless governments change their methods of taxation, particularly by adopting a wealth tax, a way of taxing these companies or taxing the very wealthy, as proposed by Thomas Piketty in his book in 2017. So how do we impose social and environmental standards on this complex system? Each sector needs to be sustainable in its own way. And I can illustrate it in this way. This shows the same system, but each of these parts needs in itself to be sustainable and if you like, a circular economy. Forestry, we often think it's great to plant trees. Of course, if you plant trees and chop them down again, that's just a cycle of activity, and there's no net gain. It's the if you like, re-establishment, the rewilding of long-term, particularly tropical forests, which is needed to actually have an impact on overall carbon emissions. Agriculture is often held up as a particular culprit in the problem. It's responsible for something like 30% of carbon emissions, particularly animal agriculture and even rice production, which of course, both of which produce ruminant animals and rice paddies produce methane, which is a much more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. We need to change our attitude to agriculture. We need perhaps to have less animal agriculture, which being someone who was quite brought up on livestock farming, it's perhaps a bit hard for me to say, but undoubtedly the cattle production, in particular beef in the United States and so on, is a major contributor to CO2 and methane production. So we need to change our attitude. I often think that there are much better diets, both from the point of view of the environment, but also from the point of view of health than we have. And these will probably be vegetable-based diets. I often think that possibly the Japanese have amongst the best diets, and that includes fish, of course, things which are better for you and better for the environment than our present systems of farming. And manufacturing itself, we can't have a throwaway society. We need to recycle and use things again. That particularly applies to plastics, which besides their energy and carbon costs, also have a terrible polluting effects on the ocean through the microparticles, which go all over the world and become toxic to fish and other marine organisms. So you can see we've got to take each of these things, the public sector, the service sector, and the consumers have all got to play their part in a greening of the economy, responsible use of materials, recycling, and avoiding the use of fossil fuels. So we've got a way to go. We have to change radically. And James Truslow Adams in 1931 wrote of the American dream, the dream of a land in which life could be better and richer and fuller for every man, with opportunity for each according to his ability or achievement. In modern times, this American dream has meant consumption, consumerism, and the pursuit of wealth. And the American dream is emulated now in every developing country. What we need to get to, I'm going to unshare again. Oh, it does work very well that now. What we need is a green dream, if you like, and the system is likely to be localized and community-based, with emphasis on renewable resources and recycling, zero carbon emissions, zero pollution, minimal transportation of materials and food, and quality health, education, and social welfare. So really, again, if it was a tall order at the beginning, it's an even taller order at the end. This idealistic, if you like, utopian view, which is, however, essential for survival and certainly for the future of the planet and the biosphere. Of course, we have made, we've made quite a number of achievements. As I say, there are these targets, these emission targets, which countries are trying to actually adhere to. It's sometimes difficult to know how we're going to monitor this or how we're going to measure it. But renewable energy now, and I think Germany now, it's 12% of energy use is now renewable. Most of Europe, it's around 10%. United States, it's around 5%. And in other parts of the world, often renewable energy is even greater. If you have, particularly if you have hydroelectric and other sources like that, besides wind and solar. And I don't think we should dismiss nuclear power. James Lovelock, the 101-year-old scientist that I mentioned at the beginning, has always been an advocate of nuclear power because it is zero carbon. Of course, there have been a number of accidents which have made people, and particularly, for example, in Germany, led to the closure of nuclear power stations, particularly 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, and most recently the Japanese Fukushima. And this tends to make people very nervous about nuclear power, but the number of people that have died as a result of nuclear power compared to the number of people that died in coal mining and from coal pollution is tiny. So we have to look at this, and with the possible advent of nuclear fusion, it should not be written off. And there are also ways, it's a very expensive thing at the moment to do, but there are cheaper ways of having safe nuclear fuel that a number of countries are working on. So I don't want to dwell on that, but it is an important contributor along, as I say, with solar, wind, and hydropower, which is very, very good. So we've made these achievements, but I think the message is really that we've got a hell of a lot more to go, further to go. We've seen these temperature rises. We're seeing extreme events. The temperature now, I mean, in recent days, the temperature in Canada, British Columbia, in the north of this continent, in Canada, has reached over 50 degrees Celsius. Incredible. And the whole northwest of the United States is suffering from an extreme heat wave. Even here, I mean, we're And in the northeast of the United States, we've got temperatures that are very comparable with Trichy. I keep the different places in my weather app, and I can see that the temperature in Trichy is often the same as it is in Pennsylvania, and that's a very good indication that the weather is changing. And of course, it's led to other extreme events like floods and so on. And sea level rise is already measurable in a number of places. So we really have to take this seriously. And who can we ask to do this? We currently rely on what we call leaders, politicians, who usually have degrees in politics and economics. And that economics is the sort of economics that was taught or was founded on principles 150 years ago, and certainly that was taught at least for the last 50 years. And I think we need to change our outlook towards, if you like, environmental economics and sustainable economics. And we need people who can make scientific, environmental, and ethical decisions. And I'm afraid our present leaders, perhaps, with when industry and the oil companies is funding their election campaigns, are perhaps not well equipped to do that. So I finally share my slide, hopefully the last time. So what's the answer? And here I cite, I quote again, this time from former British Prime Minister Tony Blair. What government should be doing is education, education, and education. The answers definitely lie there. I mentioned James Lovelock and his Gaia Hypothesis, Michael Ruse, philosopher Kenneth Bolding, an economist, Kate Rayworth, another economist. And I mentioned a few more economists with a different view. Ha-Joon Chang in Cambridge. Thomas Piketty, I mentioned already, Capital in the 21st Century. A very good analysis of partly historical and partly analytical view of present economic policy. And as I say, a proponent of a small wealth tax, which would do so much to increase equity and also provide for development of sustainable economy. Thomas Piketty's book is 650 pages. I've read the whole thing, and the reason I read it is that I was in Trichy on a very hot at a very hot time of year, and I really couldn't go out in the middle of the day. So I sat under the air conditioner and read all 650 pages of Thomas Piketty's book. So you have an advantage there. And Joseph Stiglitz, who also another one who was against simple use of GDP and thinking again, Stiglitz, who was a Nobel Prize laureate, he points out that interrelated crises of environmental degradation and human suffering of our current age demonstrate that something is fundamentally wrong with the way we assess economic performance and social progress. He argues that using GDP as the chief measure of our economic health does not provide an accurate assessment of the economy or the state of the world and the people living in it. So I've added to that Al Gore. Whatever you think of Al Gore, he did a lot to publicize the issues of climate change in his film, The Inconvenient Truth. David Attenborough, the long-standing biologist and broadcaster, there's a new film called A Life on Our Planet about his life and work, which I saw recently and I highly recommend. And finally, Greta Tunberg. She was 15 years old when she went on strike from school outside the Swedish parliament. She's now 18 and she's had a lot of publicity. She made speeches to the US Congress, to the UN, and to the World Economic Forum. To quote her here, "I have a dream that the people in power as well as the media start treating this crisis like the existential emergency it is. And I have a very great admiration of this young woman. And the hope really is that young people, the next generation, will take things more seriously. And I think there's good evidence that they are. We've really been too complacent and perhaps too lazy to really get on with what needs to be done. As I said, we simply have to stop using fossil fuel, and we have to recycle finite and expendable, both biological and other resources. So it's a critical time, and I hope I've gone through the story. I hope I've highlighted a number of key people. I do recommend that you look at James Lovelock's books. I think it's well worth, even though it's a few years old, rereading his Gaia Hypothesis. Kenneth Bolding and Kate Rayworth and the other contributors to the debate that I've highlighted this morning. So I want to thank the organizers. I hope I've stuck more or less to time. I think I'm not far out. I did produce a backup copy of this talk in case we got disconnected, and it ran to 59 minutes and 33 seconds. So I hope it's dead spot on. Thank you very much. It's great to take part in this. I look forward to an interesting discussion to come. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks a ton, Dr. Andrew Speedy, for the insightful talk. The systems approach with the whole earth approach perspective enabled us to understand the importance of a balanced interaction between economical and political systems to offer solutions to the environmental concerns we are plagued with. You, having dwelled deep on the Sustainable Development Goals, Gaia Hypothesis, carbon emissions, was insightful indeed. It is now time for Q&A session. Dr. Michael David Premkumar, Head Department of Management Studies, would now coordinate the session for us. It's over to Dr. Michael.
Good morning, Dr. Andrew Speedy. We have a few questions from the participants. The first question from Ronald David to everyone is, good morning, sir. Thank you for your enlightenment. Should virtual water, that is within quotes, invisible water that goes into production, be taught to students to create awareness about degradation of ecosystem? Is it possible to arrange carbon neutrality in institutions? This is his first question. Possible to attain carbon neutrality in institutions?
Yes, of course. I mean, perhaps institutions, colleges and universities should be leading examples. And there are good examples of this in a number of places. I can cite as an example the United Nations building in Vietnam. While I was there, they set up this carbon neutral headquarters for all the agencies, using solar energy, using good insulation, using reflective glass, all the things you can do to ensure that the building and the facilities for the United Nations was carbon neutral and it was known as the Green 1 UN building. It took quite a long time. It was actually a conversion of an existing building too, I should say, and it is now fully functional. And there are other universities and colleges who really achieve that. I think these are the things: insulation, recycling of materials, the avoidance of plastics, etc., etc. Even as far as green roofs, you can grow things on the roof or on the terraces of buildings. A green roof is often a very effective way to actually cover the thing and to be effective. So I think institutions, and particularly universities and colleges, can set a very good example by doing this sort of thing. No, you're mute. You're mute. Sorry, you have to unmute. There you go. Yep.
Is it clear now?
Yes, yes.
The next question is from Mr. Navasaktivel. He is asked it in the regional language. I just translate it. Is it good to see natural resources as a commodity? That's his first question. And he's got one more question. He says globalization leads to resources of third world countries being exploited. Your views on that?
Yes, that's right. And I'm sorry I can't speak Tamil. I only know 2 words in Tamil because I used to go around taking pictures of particularly the temples. So I know Ponga and Niri Thunga. So I can go and stop, which was all I could say to the driver. Yes, of course, biological materials, particularly wood and forestry, is a commodity, but we have to treat it. We have to treat it as something that must be paid for. I mean, we talk about externalities in economics. It's very easy to think that wood and forestry is free. All you have to do is cut it down. And you don't have to pay for it. You don't have to pay for the replanting. But of course, in the long run, you do. And making sure that forests are replanted or allowed to regenerate is absolutely vital. And yes, of course, wood is a commodity, and a valuable one. And you can make great things from wood, but you must see an effective forestry system. And I often think forestry is an underrated discipline. I was lucky enough to live with foresters in Oxford. And my office eventually was sited within the Oxford Forestry Institute. So I learned quite a lot about trees and forestry. And really that, the management of forests, and particularly replanting and natural regeneration, are things that can be done. There was a second part to the question, and I can't remember what it was.
Resources of third world countries being exploited. Your views on that?
Of course, and being British, I think the British have exploited more countries than anybody else. And yes, of course, we have to look very carefully at the exploitation of all resources. And the Western countries, and particularly Britain and some of the other countries, have been guilty of that for hundreds of years. So yeah, we have to stop it. And some of the new commodities are going to be particularly critical, like lithium. We all want electric cars and everything electric and phones and the rest of it, but lithium is quite a limiting resource. There are actually reserves in Britain in the southwest, so perhaps some of that can be tapped. But we do need, we certainly have to be critical of where things come from. And if we can recycle things as much as possible, then we will make less demands on the primary sources of raw materials. But this has to be done. And one of the other things which is critical is water. And we have to be very careful about water use. And I know Trichy is perhaps feels this more than most, because you do have water shortages at other times, which are the results of the loss of water further upstream. And it will be a very critical factor in future. So, we need to rethink this, and this will be achieved. I mean, how will it be achieved? It will be achieved through international treaties and international discussions. And the UN is the right body to do this. So you do need to get together countries need to get together and to agree how they actually limit the exploitation of developing countries in this process.
So the next question is from Mr. Benedict Paul. Man is metaphorically described as predatorial or parasitic in relation to the natural world. Isn't nature predatorial too? For instance, Ulysses was intimidated and even harassed by nature for the simple reason that he wanted to return home and stay away from trouble. Just because nature doesn't think, is it fair to say man ought to stay away from it obsequiously, or even worse, to commune and converse with it like primitive man did?
Yes, it's perhaps it's unfair to say that man is a parasite and other things are not parasites. And of course, parasites are all part of nature. You know, they say if you took everything away in the world, everything else away in the world, you'd end up with everything still appearing there in the form of nematodes. You know, there's worms, you know, in everything. You know, the indication of a successful parasite is one that doesn't kill its host and one that, you know, cohabits, if you like, with its host, and therefore, you know, everything carries on in a balanced and self-regulating way. So, you know, the problem with man as a parasite is that he is actually killing his host. He's killing the biosphere. You know, he's like a really bad virus. You know, that the problem we have with these, we've had with coronavirus is that it's so lethal. And even, you know, some other viruses like Ebola and so on are even worse. You know, they're bad because they actually kill. You know, other viruses we live with, you know, we live with the common cold. We live with quite a lot of things, but, you know, it's okay to be a parasite and it's okay for other animals to be parasites, but don't kill your host. Don't kill the goose that lays the golden egg, as it were.
Yes. The next question is from Sharaya Sonowan. India is a highly populated country. Will it be possible to bring sustainable development of nature in India because of the population?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Yes, I think so. I mean, what I haven't said is that we do have to change our outlook, and it's perhaps harder in India because of the population pressure than perhaps it is in the United States, where there's much less, you know, there's so much wide open space. But at the end of the day, to achieve all this, we really do have to change our ambitions and our outlook. You know, what's important? Is it video games? Is it consumer goods? Is it travel to lie on beaches on far off shores? Or is it culture? Is it art? Is it music? Is it these things, which of course India is perhaps much more advanced than the United States. That's perhaps that's an extreme statement, but you know, India has great culture and has great music and so on. So these things should be our objectives and not the consumerism which has dominated for the last few years. We've got to get people off this, and we do have some advantages because we do have the internet. Knowledge is now universal, so things are getting easier. But at the end of the day, I mean, India does have many advantages in terms of culture, and provided that we can have an economy which is fair and equitable, people have sufficient income to have good health, good education, and so on, then it'll work. Of course, you know, population pressure has to reduce, and it is reducing. I mean, the Malthus was not quite right. You know, the number of children has declined everywhere, and we're seeing things get better in that respect. But at the end of the day, everyone has this problem of living within their means and having a better objective in life than the mad consumerism, which is the American dream and the American model and the European model. And I suspect that India might have some better ideas for this.
Thank you, sir. We have a question from Raghavi Kannan. It's global. Does Congresswoman AOC's Green New Deal address sustainable development enough to bring out visible change? And if so, should other developed nations or perhaps even the UN also work on constituting their own version of the same?
No, I didn't quite get that. I didn't quite get the question. It's about sustainable development, yes? Say again, sorry, say again.
says
repeat?
Congresswoman AOC's Green New Deal address
Okay, yeah.
on sustainable development enough to bring about visible changes? And if so, should other developed nations or perhaps even the United Nations also work on constituting their own version of the same?
I don't really want to get too far into American politics. I've only just got the vote here a few months ago because I became a US citizen, as well as a UK citizen, I should say. But of course, AOC is a young, what they call a progressive, and there's a lot of opposition from within her own party, and certainly from the other side of the aisle, the Republican Party. So it's very difficult to see how this is going to progress, but it should. I mean, yes, there should be a Green New Deal, and all countries should do it. And how do you do this? Yes, and maybe the United Nations is an instrument. I often wonder whether we should allow politicians to come and go and to be in charge of environmental resources and even health and education. Are these not unalienable rights, as the American Constitution says? I suspect the Indian Constitution says something similar. We have the right to these things, and we shouldn't put them into the short-term hands of politicians. So yes, a Green New Deal is the right approach, and I would support her, and I would support the UN further developing agreements that would try to get this to be more universal. And we have to certainly reduce emissions. We have to reduce the deforestation. We have to reduce pollution and the use of plastics. And all these things require international action and international agreements.
The next question, sir, is from Ms. Karpagavalli Natarajan. Today, many of the species are becoming extinct, biodiversity being collapsed. Market commodities are all natural resources. Technology is more man-centered than eco-centered. Sir, is it possible to make a new utopian dream to a green ecotopian dream?
Well, I mean, yes, and a lot has to be done. When you say that species are going extinct, I mean, the reason species go extinct is partly loss of their natural ecosystem. And I think that rewilding, as it's called, should also be a part of the Green New Deal, if you like, or the green system. You need to look carefully at providing the forests and the natural areas that are required for species to live. Of course, again, perhaps it's a bit utopian, but this is something David Attenborough has said very strongly, that these are the things we need to do. I mean, what will happen to the tiger in India? You've lost nearly all the natural range areas of the tiger, and the numbers have dwindled terribly. So what are you going to do about that? You need some sort of policy to try to rewild the earth. And again, we use so much land for agriculture, but actually agriculture can be done on much smaller areas. We've now got new systems. Technology is giving us things like hydroponics and aquaponics, where food can be grown on very small areas, in recycled water and so on. So we may be able to break away from our demands for land and our demands for taking away from the natural ecosystems. So yes, as I say, that perhaps is part of the idea that rewilding of our system in order to prevent extinctions and perhaps to re-establish species that are in danger is in fact a very important aspect.
So due to paucity of time, I'd like to combine the last two questions. CB John is asked, in what all ways can we make others aware that we are only a part of nature and each entity is as important as humans? and followed by Dr. Ragini Karthik. When we are going for restoration process of water bodies, some are fully polluted. Do you have any new mechanism to solve such problems with less cost? So these are two different questions, but one talks about what all ways can we make others aware that we are only a part of nature and each entity is as important as humans. The second one is when you're going for restoration process of water bodies, some are fully polluted. You have any mechanism to solve such problems with less cost?
Yeah, well, yes, I suppose our position in the world is to some extent, if you like, it's a theological issue in a way. We think of ourselves as more important than any other species, but of course that's not true. We're dependent on all other species. And we're dependent on our position in the world. So this is an attitude, and this is something which perhaps comes back to the point about education. You need to teach people that the environment is important and that other species are just as important as the human species. There's nothing wrong with that. It's it's good to believe that. That we need to coexist, to cohabit with the other species on the planet. What you can do about polluted water courses and so on. I mean, this is a technical issue, and there are technologies. The sharing of technologies. I mean, there are ways of using. You can even use plants that remove heavy metals from water courses and so on. I mean. I think water hyacinth has been used in this way, although it's in itself, it's caused problems by its rapid spread and as an exotic taking over. But there, I would say I would go back to I've been critical of the United Nations a bit, but I worked for them for a long time, and I would say that these technologies are available from the United Nations agency, from the Food and Agriculture Organization, from the from the scientific education organization UNESCO and so on, and really all the technology exists and all the information exists to do this. So and it comes down again to providing universities, research institutes, and so on with the ability to take part in this and to contribute. Pretty certain that you can solve many of these technical issues with existing knowledge and the spread of existing knowledge and through education of people.
Thank you, Dr. Andrew Speedy, for the simple and in-depth answers you gave for such a varied type of questions. Thank you once again.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks a ton, Dr. Andrew Speedy, Dr. Michael, and everyone for your engaging participation. We all, I'm sure, have understood the pressing need to stop depleting the natural resources with immediate effect. Let's do our best. Thanks, one and all. We are moving on to the special address 2. Thanks, everyone. Environmental protection doesn't happen in vacuum. You can't separate the impact on the environment from the impact on our professions, organizations, families, communities, and countries at large. Nurturing nature is a prerequisite for us to have a better future. The organic linkage of time, space, landscape, and emotion is inevitable in shaping the personality of individuals as ones with awakened human potential with ingrained concern for environment and its upkeep. To drive home this point, we have special address 2 to be addressed by Dr. Nirmal Selvamani, writer and eco-critic on the theme Thinai Studies as a new avatar of humanities. May now request Dr. Suresh Frederick, a prolific writer, lyricist, pioneer in eco-criticism, person who has traveled widely, the Dean of Research and Development of Bishop Iber College, to introduce a special speaker to the August gathering.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I wish to thank the organizers. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I wish to thank the organizers for giving me an opportunity to introduce Dr. Nirmal Selvamani. It's really a proud moment for me because he happens to be a mentor. He is the person who introduced eco-criticism to me. I got into this beautiful, wonderful field because of him. And many of my words have done their PhDs, MPhils on his theory. When we think of criticism, when we think of Indian criticism, we always think of Rasa theory and other North Indian theories. Here comes Dr. Nirmal Selvamani, sir. He has proposed a theory called oikopoetics. Later on, he revised that or renamed that into Neo-Tinai poetics. Indeed, it's a great pleasure for me to introduce you, sir. Welcome, sir. He was formerly professor and head the Department of English Studies and Dean, School of Social Sciences and Humanities, Central University of Tamil Nadu. Formerly, he also served Madras Christian College as associate professor. And it's a great privilege for me to inform you all that he served in many foreign universities as visiting faculty. His major areas of interest in the last 4 decades have been alternative, that is Tinai, alternative society, Tinai studies, Tolkapiam, eco-criticism, poetics, and theory. He pioneered the Tinai social movement from late 1970s through a discussion group called Tinai, Street Theatre, musical performances based on Tinai songs, and then the first ever Tinai-based courses, Tinai poetics, later on eco-criticism, and Tamil museology in the Indian university system, the forum founded along with Watson Solomon, now known as Tinai. Previously, it was called OSLE India. The first ever journal, Indian Journal of Eco-Criticism in India to promote eco-criticism, and numerous lectures, seminars, and publications on Tinai and Tinai-related matters. Selvamani, sir, of course, Tamil poetics of early 80s introduced eco-criticism into the Indian academics. He has developed a new area of study known as Tinai Ilakya, South Indian eco-museology, in a 1991 essay. Revived in the 1880s, early Tamil philosophy known as, it's a literally a vision, Kachi, which preceded the Darshanas and formulated a theory of Puttinai, Neo-Tinai poetics, Puttinai, formerly oikopoetics, widely used by several scholars as a theoretical framework. 3 months ago, he was awarded Siranda Tamil Aringer Virudu, Best Tamil Scholar, by the Indian Medical Association branch. Professor has published 14 books, more than 50 chapters in books, more than 40 research papers in conferences, and conference papers more than 100. He has played the guitar professionally, scripted and directed plays, as well as composed music for plays. Of course, a multifaceted personality. Welcome, sir. Thank you for coming. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? So, the Most Reverend Bishop of Tiruchi Tanjavur Diocese, respected Principal of Bishop Eber College, Dr. Shobana, Dean of Arts, Dr. Shanti, Associate Dean of Arts, Dr. Michael David Prem Kumar, Associate Dean of International Relations, Dr. Suresh Frederick, Dean of Research and Development and Vice President of TINAI. Thank you so much for your very kind, generous words about me. Dr. Andrew Speedy, who has set the tone of this discussion stage in a brilliant manner. All the faculty members and students of humanities programs in Bishop Eber College, and all those who are lending technical support to this event. Theodore Bhaskaran sir, and dear participants, Vanakkam. A very good morning to all of you. I want to thank especially Dr. Shobana, Dr. Suresh Frederick, and Dr. Shanti for inviting me to share my thoughts on the humanities in this program. Though my talk focuses on the humanities, that's disciplines like literature, musicology, Dr. Suresh Frederick meant musicology, not museology. Well, that could also be another subject, of course, which can be pursued from a humanities perspective. We think of disciplines like fine arts, philosophy, religion, history, cultural archaeology. Though my talk, kind of deals with all of these, it addresses all the disciplinary groups in the academia, social sciences and natural sciences as well, because any one of these three groups, that is humanities, social sciences, and natural sciences, cannot be discussed in isolation. But considering the constraint of time and the scope of the present discussion and the context, my radical critique will target only the humanities. But much of what I say about the humanities is applicable to social sciences and the other sciences, including natural and mathematical also. About humanities, what worries some scholars is its inadequacy because it does not study everything. To one scholar, it is such because it lacks a practical arm to put into practice its ideas. However, a closer look at the humanities shows that the separation of humans from nature is the major cause of the inadequacy of the humanities. To surmount this problem, the well-known eco-critic Gary Snyder proposed what he called pan-humanism. But even pan-humanism will not rid the humanities of their inadequacy because the separation of the human from the non-human is due to the Western idea of the human as an entity that is not non-human. So we need to address this dualistic definition of the human. The separation of the human from the non-human, particularly evident in the concept of environment, about which Dr. Speedy talked about a great deal. Now, which is the basis of ecology, eco-criticism, environmental humanities, and also ecological humanities. The dualism of the world and the human in the environment leads us to examine the idea of the human in Western thought, particularly of Hegel, Nietzsche, Freud, Derrida, and Heidegger, who have critiqued the Western conception of the human. Of these critiques, Heidegger's critique is important to my argument because it presupposes differentiated continuity of the human and the world. Heidegger's view is ultimately traceable to the worldview of TINAI societies, wherein the human is a TINAI, a home. If the human is a TINAI, the humanities ought to be about TINAI. So the humanities should make way for TINAI studies. As TINAI studies is about the human and the non-human, both the social and the natural sciences will also have to make way for TINAI studies. So that is the summary of the argument I'm going to present to you now. So as you can see, this session will not really talk about TINAI as such or the scope of TINAI studies and so on, but only to say that we need to somehow, revamp our educational system and think along the lines of thinning. So let me just begin my presentation now. First, I want to just say something about this inadequacy of the humanities, which I indicated to you. There's something about the humanities which makes them somehow inadequate. Miller and Spellmayer, who brought out the New Humanities Reader in 2006, have pointed out, in a very Baconian spirit, I think, that the discourse of humanities cannot be mere knowledge of particular fields anymore, but should redefine itself as, I quote, the human dimension of all knowledge. Quote. Arguably, knowledge of everything would include knowledge of the non-human world and also knowledge of the interactions between humans and non-humans. But what counts as knowledge? Will knowledge validated by scientific method alone be considered valid knowledge? Or other forms of knowledge which cannot be validated by this method also count as knowledge? Let us consider this question with an example. It is common knowledge that St. Francis of Assisi, who is regarded as the patron saint of ecology, is said to have enjoyed sibling relation with even wild animals, like the wolf. Such a relation neither stands to logical reason, nor gains acceptance of those who endorse the Aristotelian idea of the human as the not non-human. As sibling relation between two different species is not a rationally valid one, knowledge of such relation could only be false or invalid if scientific method is the yardstick. Consequently, such knowledge, which will at best be mythical, may not serve the purposes of a humanities scholar who seeks to use such knowledge as empirical evidence. If so, how will the humanities be truly inclusive when it embraces the non-human? If Miller and Spellmayer found the humanities guilty of exclusion, another scholar by name Michael Epstein perceived a major lack in the humanities. He argues that the natural sciences study nature and technology, which is their practical arm, transforms nature into objects of human interest. Similarly, the social sciences study the human society, and politics, their practical arm, transforms the society into polities as humans want them to be. But the humanities, which study culture, do not have a practical arm to transform culture into cultural practices, artistic movements, new disciplinary fields, new institutions, new lifestyles, and new intellectual communities. Therefore, he proposed a new field he called transhumanities as the practical arm of the humanities. Epstein's theory is quite fascinating because it is constructed logically. But does this well-constructed theory reflect the reality? Don't the disciplines of humanities translate into cultural praxis? What about such academic programs as theater, vocal or instrumental music, creative writing, writing itself, field archaeology, and other such courses, degree programs, or diploma programs? It is true that there is no single practical entity for the humanities like politics for the social sciences or technology for the sciences. Even as everything in the domains of the natural and social sciences does not translate into practice, everything in the humanities also does not. But a large chunk of knowledge in the humanities is translated into practice. But we may turn to the well-known idea Epstein builds on, that his idea being that humanities, study culture. This idea is based on the assumption that culture is neither society nor nature. But this assumption has already been problematized by scholars like Bruno Latour in his Politics of Nature, which came out in 1999, or Donna Haraway's The Companion Species Manifesto, which came out in 2003. Now, they had already critiqued the separation of nature and culture. But Epstein's work is based on the separation of nature and culture. So it may be worthwhile to understand the rationale of the separation. Let's start with the term culture. Like the humanities, the term culture also defies definition. However, for a working definition, we can turn to Claude Lévi-Strauss, who defined it as, I quote, that which depends upon a system of norms regulating society and therefore is capable of varying from one social structure to another, end quote. Culture's variability is due to the fact that it is that which is made by humans to meet their specific needs in specific contexts. Whether it is food or dwelling or clothing, each is made in different ways by different societies. We might add that human society itself is culture if we contrast it with the unorganized pre-social phase of human existence. Further, if we understand society as a group of humans among whom there are patterns of relationships that could be collectively called culture, then society itself is culture. If culture is the common denominator between humanities and the social sciences, the distinction between the two domains, namely the humanities and the social sciences, will be redundant generally, and particularly in the theory of Epstein. Ultimately, culture to Strauss is a set of artifacts made by humans as against nature, which is not human-made. Such an understanding of culture implies an opposition between culture and nature. Culture is that which is not nature. Are culture and nature discrete after all? To a dualist, a cultural artifact like a wooden wheel, for example, which is a discrete cultural entity, is separate from the natural entity, namely wood, out of which it was made. If the wheel is culture, wood is nature. While the raw material, wood, is non-human, the product, namely the wheel, is no more non-human because somehow it is hominized, because it's made by a human. If the raw material, which belongs to the domain of nature, is not hominized, the product, namely the wheel, is. As culture is that which is hominized, the dualism of human and non-human is at the root of the idea of culture. This is clearly evident if we turn to the word savage. This word originated in the state society sometime around mid-13th century. When it points to a human, it is one who is in a state of nature. Supposedly it derives from the Latin word silva, which means wood. Therefore, a savage or one who is of the woods is less human or non-human. We can identify three implications of this word. One, a human is the other of the world or of nature. Two, a human ought not to be natural in order to be human. And three, when natural, a human is a degraded or non-human being. Now, all of these implications make the savage a prototype of all marginal people, like the Adivasis, people of color, women, and other subalterns. Though their human-like bodies give them human appearance, they are less human or non-human by virtue of their lack of that which distinguishes a human from the non-human. This distinguishing feature could be the rational mind, as Aristotle presumed, or culture, which is often the male power that subdues and manipulates nature for its own purposes. If you're interested in reading more about it, here is a paper by Sherry Ottmer titled, "Is Female to Male as Nature is to Culture?" The distinction between culture and nature is something that the primal people will not understand at all because there is no such thing among them. Such a distinction is possible only in a homoarchic state society built on various types of hierarchy: domestic versus wild, Nadu or country versus Kadu or jungle, among others. As the state itself was created by clearing large tracts of forest, it is that which is not wilderness or forest. While the state is habitable space, the forest is uninhabitable space. The uninhabitable space is not just wilderness, it is nature as opposed to the state, which is culture. Thus emerged some of the oldest binaries among humans all over the world. The state is the proper residence of humans, whereas wilderness is that of the non-humans. A category, as pointed out earlier, includes not only non-human animals, but also the subalterns who are deprived of humanity. In short, the state society has effectively separated the humans from nature. As a good part of the humanities originated in the state society, when the separation from nature was complete, the humanities needed to affirm their exclusiveness, not only in the anthropocentric genre like the tragedy, but also through the supposedly nature-oriented genre like the pastoral. The Theocratine Pastoral was an anthropocentric gaze at nature and the naturized human like the shepherd from a convenient location in the state society. Though Romanticism could be viewed as an antidote to the oppressively alienating power of Ozymandian anthropocentrism, it could at best mourn the loss of the pagan world of the pre-pastoral shepherds, in which the human was continuous with the non-human. Wordsworth could not possibly live the life of a pagan who would revere his ancestral Tritons and Proteus in the ocean when the railroad was being laid through the heart of Windermere, a beautiful spot of the Lake District he loved most. If the state society commenced the project of the separation of humans and nature, industrialism aggravated it to intensify the Anthropocene, about which Dr. Speedy spoke about a great deal, including the great acceleration and all of the impacts it had on various Earth systems. It's becoming increasingly clear, isn't it, that the separation of humans from nature is the major cause of the inadequacy in the humanities. Such an inadequacy is not remedied by interdisciplinarity or crossbreeding, as some of you were suggesting when you were commencing this conference, in order to yield new disciplines like digital humanities and humanistic approach to biological or physical science. All of these will not do. So interdisciplinarity will not do. The humanities ought to integrate the non-human. That's what it has to do. Therefore, Gary Snyder proposed pan-humanities as a discourse, which in his view will integrate the human and the non-human, particularly nature, and proposed it as an alternative to the current humanities. According to him, I quote, "It would take the whole long Homo sapiens experience into account and eventually make an effort to include our non-human kin. It would transform itself into a post-human humanism, which would defend endangered cultures and species alike," end quote. Elsewhere, Snyder builds up on this idea in the following manner. I quote, "There is no name yet for a humanistic scholarship that embraces the non-human. I suggest in a spirit of pagan play, we call it pan-humanism." And I end the quote. But how will the non-human become part of the humanities? How will a domain which is about the human become one which is also about the non-human? Isn't the human an entity which is not non-human? Does not the human exclude the human? The exclusive human is one who is imagined as being separate from the natural world, despite the derivation of the word human from the Latin word humus, which means the earth. We may meet with the exclusive human in several eco-theoretical writings. One of the earliest habitats of the exclusive human is Christian theology. In his essay, The Historical Roots of Our Ecological Crisis, Lynn White observes that, I quote, "Christianity, in absolute contrast to ancient paganism and Asia's religions, except perhaps Zoroastrianism, not only established a dualism of man and nature, but also insisted that it is God's will that man exploit nature for his proper ends. I end quote. Tracing the historical roots of our current ecological crisis to this dualism that he talked about. However, the philosophical or ontological dualism that stemmed from Greek thought and later from Christian theology colors scholarship in the humanities also. This dualism is strongly evident in the concept of environment, about which we spoke a great deal this morning. The English word environment has entered ecology through translation. The original German phrase Ernst Haeckel used in the definition of ecology was umgebenden Außenwelt, which meant the surrounding outside world. And this word found an English equivalent in the word environment, which means that which surrounds. And this word derives from the French word vire, which means to turn. Though Haeckel spoke of all organisms, environment has come to mean the surroundings of a human particularly. As Cheryl Dotfelty points out, environment implies two things: anthropocentrism and dualism. Anthropocentric it is because we do not normally speak of the environment of mosquitoes and macaques, but almost always of humans. Being the surroundings of humans, environment sets up a dualism unlike the term ecology, which is based on the idea of interrelationship. Environment has become the foundational concept of eco-criticism, unfortunately. And it has also become the foundation of environmental humanities as well as ecological humanities, though originally the field was called ecological humanities. In fact, very often the latter two are used interchangeably. That is, environmental humanities sometimes, and sometimes ecological humanities. While the former is commonly used in the USA, that's environmental humanities, the latter, that is ecological humanities, is probably tolerated in Australia, I think. The Stanford University Project of Environmental Humanities defines this discipline as an interdisciplinary approach to environmental issues. As environment is the basic concept of ecology, as it has come to be rather, environmental humanities and ecological humanities, ecologization of the humanities as a measure to remedy the exclusion of the non-human in the humanities is highly problematic. We may do well to consider how Carolyn Merchant approached this issue. It is said that she is the one who has brought ecology to the humanities. Now, what is the conceptual basis of her ecological humanities? Her volume, Death of Nature, which came out in 1980, does not have one conceptual base, but at least three: nature, ecology, and environment. As the title itself indicates, her predominant focus is nature. She approaches this age-old theme from a historico-feminist perspective. She shows how the female earth was central to the organic cosmology, which was undermined by the scientific revolution and the rise of a market-oriented culture in early modern Europe. The removal of animistic organic assumptions about the cosmos constituted the death of nature, the most far-reaching effect of the scientific revolution. Organic assumptions were superseded by mechanistic ones. She observes that J.C. Smuts had discussed a philosophical alternative to mechanism in his book Holism and Evolution, which came out in 1926, defining holism as a unity of parts which is so close and intense as to be more than a sum of its parts, which not only gives a particular structure to the parts, but so relates and determines them in their synthesis that their functions are altered. So that's a quotation from Carolyn Merchant. Proposing holism as the alternative worldview to adequately accommodate the ecological in the humanities, Merchant cites the science of ecology as the most important example of holism today. Strangely, ecology, a product of the scientific revolution itself, fired by anti-holistic dominant worldview she herself identified as mechanistic. You know, the scientific revolution has been shown as an example of holism, ironically. Ernst Haeckel's Science of Ecology does speak of interrelationship between organism and the environment, but having taken recourse to a concept such as environment, he adhered to the scientific method and subscribed to the dualistic philosophical anthropological presupposition of the Enlightenment. By scientizing interrelationship, Haeckel based his definition on an anti-organic mechanistic paradigm. The limitations of Haeckelian scientization of the organismic world led Arnines to characterize scientific ecology as shallow because it could not get to the bottom of the issues. It can only address the what and how of the organisms and their world, but not the crucial why questions. A rational approach cannot show us the whole picture. The true
Dear all, we have lost connectivity with the speaker. We are trying to reconnect. Please hold on.
Can you hear me now? I'm sorry about that interruption.
Sir, we can hear you. You can go on, sir.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry about that. The limitations of Haeckelian scientization of the organismic world led Arnines to characterize scientific ecology as shallow because it could not get to the bottom of issues, because it could not really address the why questions. So a rational approach will not do because it cannot address the true interrelationship among the organisms and their world. See, only the whole picture, a long-term view of the matter will show us clearly that biological diversity is absolutely essential for humans to live well without degrading the planet. But this cannot be guaranteed unless we acknowledge the legitimacy of the principle of equality of all life forms, including the humans, which cannot be established by rational means. Further, biocentric equality cannot be proved scientifically. It can only be intuited. Based on intuitions rather than rationality, deep ecology seeks to avoid succumbing to the mechanistic and dominant worldview. Instead of embracing this new alternative to Haeckelian ecology, Merchant, who wrote her book 7 years after the publication of Nass's seminal essay, The Shallow and the Deep Long-Range Ecology Movement, a summary, she was content to base her argument on ecology and environment. She says that the holistic worldview sustained the organic communities who lived in equilibrium with their environments, attempting to bring together the antagonistic bedfellows, holism and environment. On the one hand, she speaks of the organic paradigm of the close-knit cooperative organic communities. And on the other, she envisages a future when new social styles can sustain the quality of the environment. Consequently, her concept of holism is vitiated by self-contradiction. In spite of its name, even ecological humanities is also based on the concept of environment. About ecological humanities, this is what Deborah Rose and Robin have to say. I quote, "Furthermore, the humanities and social sciences are increasingly dedicating a portion of their scholarly agenda to the environment. Linked with disciplines, this enlarged agenda gives us environmental economics, environmental politics, environmental anthropology, environmental philosophy, and environmental history, to name a few. Each of these subdisciplines is making significant contributions to the full arena of how we understand environments, how we understand society, history, democracy, and the future, how we may understand humanity more fully, and how we may intervene in environmental crisis in order to secure a more stable and habitable future," end quote. So these subdisciplines are based on a worldview in which, I quote, "the unit of survival is the organism in recursive and mutually constitutive relationships with its environment," I end quote. Though ecological humanities discusses Aboriginal life and issues, the discourse as such is based on the notion of environment. The authors do acknowledge that the Aboriginal people bring a large bundle of issues into their conversations about environments, issues that lie outside Western concepts of environment, and go on to identify two axioms of these people. These are the axioms. The land is the law. And the second one, you are not alone in this world. Despite this accommodation of the Aboriginal axioms in the ecological humanities, the discourse itself stubbornly bases itself on the dualist notion of environment. But in reality, is the environment separate from the human? Are not the environment and the human like the wood and the wheel that I talked about earlier? Is not the wheel continuous with the wood from which it is made? Is not the wheel both a cultural and natural entity at the same time? If so, what is the relation between the human and the non-human? You're coming back to the same old question. Our deliberation on this matter may begin with the idea of the human. The idea of the human has been contested from within the humanities itself, especially by philosophers and theorists. Significant contribution has been made in this direction by Hegel, Heidegger, and Derrida. One of the first thinkers to contest it was Hegel, whose dialectic method challenged the dualistic conception of the human as the subject over against the object. He redefined the subject as, I quote, "the self-conscious, self-legislating social actor, which is both corporate and individual, including, for example, states, families, and individuals, provided they are all free agents," close quote. Hegel's subject is not a member of the dualistic set of subject and object, but one of the dialectic triad as social subject. Nietzsche and Freud have also critiqued the idea of the human in their own ways. Nietzsche showed that good and evil and truth and falsehood are not absolute binary categories, and the dualistic conception of them is inherited from what he called blood aristocracies. Freud debunked the legitimation of the rational over the irrational. In short, Nietzsche and Freud menaced the hierarchical, ontological, dualistic paradigm of the West. In Derrida's view, the idea of the human in the human sciences is the logos, a center which stands in need of deconstruction. With the conceptual tools, namely difference and play, he destabilizes the different types of logos, including the human. To him, recourse to the dualist notion of center and non-center, or play and no play, would mean reverting to the metaphysics of presence, negating difference and play. It is this metaphysics which postulates the ideas of, quote, "man and humanism, the name of man being the name of that being who throughout the history of metaphysics or of ontotheology, in other words, throughout his entire history, has dreamed of full presence, the reassuring foundation, the origin and end of play," close quote. The human had dreamt all along in history of closing the play in self-definition by imagining one center or the other, Platonic eidos or idea, the Logos, Cartesian cogito, and Husserlian consciousness, among many others. To Derrida, and the definition of the human will be an indefinite project. In relation to the other, the human is neither fully present as a normative dualism or partially as in a state of solipsistic monism, but stands in what we may call a disrupted dualist relation. To Derrida, this paradigm is a centric structure. In this structure, one of the binary elements is privileged over the other, introducing a hierarchy within the binary. The origin of such an ontological structure can be traced to the state society, which is also hierarchical in nature. The complex biaxial horizontal vertical relation among the humans, nature, and the sacred was displaced by the uniaxial vertical relation among the three members mentioned above in the state society. The uniaxial vertical dualism of the state is reflected in its ontological paradigm too. Another philosopher who menaced the traditional ontic dualism was Heidegger. He spent much of his life deliberating on the concept of the human through the German term Dasein, which means being. In his most well-known text, Being and Time, he redefines the human as being in the world, a being whose relation to the world is not the same as that between objects and their relations, or water in a glass, or garment in a cupboard, but a constitutive one. He takes the Hegelian idea of the social subject further by obliterating the boundary between the human and the world. By a linguistic legerdemain, he hyphenates the human and the world by making the being of the former participate in the very nature of the world. In Heidegger, the human and the world become continuous by participating in each other's being while remaining differentiable. Such a paradigm is not modeled on a centric structure at all, the structures which Derrida talks about. As the members share the same ontic substratum, they are identical and equal, yet differentiable because they are non-identical and unequal also. Even as the organs of a body share the same substratum of that body, they are distinguishable as distinct entities, each having its own dissimilar functions. Similarly, the human and the world share the same ontic substratum and yet remain distinguishable. Such a paradigm is that of differentiated continuity, and this new paradigm Heidegger articulated probably builds on the earlier ideas, such as the dialectic of Hegel. Though Derrida speaks of the destruction, French, probably a German form of this word, English word destruction, of destruction of Western metaphysics discussed by Heidegger, he does not say, Derrida does not say anything about the paradigmatic shift effected by Heidegger. The paradigm of differentiated continuity makes distinctiveness possible. In the case of the human, this paradigm allows us to distinguish a human from all else that is not human. But such fullness, such as identify someone as so-and-so. But if we problematize the distinguishability of the person, we are soon out of our depths. Consider, for example, the question, where does a human begin and end? To many of us, this is a silly question because we take it for granted that a human is enclosed within a body, which is the boundary of a single person. Such a human is a psychosomatic individual, the type of human presupposed by all the humanities disciplines, including theory and ecological humanities. Several limitations of the humanities, which have caused concern among scholars, can be traced to this presupposition we just now talked about. But this notion has been contested by Neil Vernon, who tells us that a human is in fact a colony of several organisms. Our organs depend on the food and the air that are not part of the body itself, but what lie outside of it. If so, he asks, is not our body continuous with the food we eat and the air we breathe? What about the genes that make up our body? They contain substance that is not part of us, but of our ancestors. If so, are not the ancestors continuous with us? If the food and air are part of what we normally call nature, the genetic material inherited from the ancestors is ancestral. Since the ancestor is not physically present, but only spiritually through the somatic elements, the genetic material is not wholly physical. it is partially spiritual. Such anti-continuity is evident in Tinay society. A person in this society was known by his or her family that dwelt under a totemic tree. For example, Mangudi Marudanar was a person known as Marudanar, whose family was known by a totemic mango tree. And Alangudi Vanganar was Vanganar of the family of the Banyan. These persons were known by the tree at the base of which the family lived. As the ancestors of the family also lived under the same tree, the spirit of the ancestor was believed to reside in the tree, and for this reason, the tree was considered sacred. In fact, this practice of identifying a person by a family tree continues even to this day in Kerala and Kanyakumari district of Tamil Nadu. In fact, my own grandfather's house in Kanyakumari district is called Puliyamudu. And my grandfather is Puliyamudu Tata, or grandfather of the tamarind tree. Further, a human is always a third, an offspring of a heterosexual parent couple. Though certain traits are transmitted to a human through the ancestral genes, much of what makes a human is learned from other humans, including one's parents. According to Tolkapiam, an ancient Tamil text on language and other domains of knowledge, the sources of the ideas and emotions of an organism are karu, the natural cultural features in a community of which it is a part. This is true of the humans also. If so, to be human, these features are as necessary as one's parents. All these go to show that the boundaries of a human are not hair or his skin. A human is ontically continuous with the other humans, nature, and the sacred, and cannot be a discrete individual, though differentiable as an entity as such. Even as the hand is both as part of the body and the body itself. To understand the functions of a hand, it is necessary to understand the whole body and consider the former in an organic relation to the latter. Similarly, a human is both a member of the home, namely Tinay, as well as the home itself. In an organic relation with the natural and the sacred members, a human makes a home at Tinay, an oikos located in a particular place. Consequently, the human, who is nothing less than a home or a Tinay or oikos, is an anthro-natural sacral unit with each member participating in the being of the other, affirming ontically differentiable continuity. I would like to cite an instance of such ontic-continuity which manifests as kinship between humans and the non-human beings. Let us turn to the Mishmi people who live in the Dibang Valley district of Arunachal Pradesh. They call Arunachal Pradesh. The Mishmi is one of the 26 Tinay societies in this state of India. 3 clans of these people, it's Idu, Miju, and Digaru, live in the Indian territory, and one of their clans called Deng lives in South Tibet. Their habitat, which is the Dibang Valley, covers an area of 9,129 square kilometers with a population of 8,004 people who live in 142 villages with just 1 person per square kilometer. Therefore, it's said to be the least populated district in the whole of India. Dibang Valley is named after the river Dibang. The district was created in 1980, and this is of special interest to the country due to its tiger population, though the district has only 29 animals, according to a government report published in 2018. A little less than half the total area of Dibang Valley has already been declared Dibang Wildlife Sanctuary. As this sanctuary is also the habitat of tigers, the Indian government is planning to change the name of the sanctuary to Dibang Tiger Reserve. Tiger conservation in India goes back to pre-independent days. In 1936, the first tiger conservation project called Jim Corbett National Park was established in Uttarakhand, but the Indian government itself declared tiger as the national animal in 1973 only, when it launched Project Tiger to protect the tigers in the country. The Indian government looks upon tiger or Panthera tigers, especially the Bengal tiger, which symbolizes strength and agility, as India's wildlife wealth. But how do the Mishmi people see it? while Ambika Ayyadure, who has been studying the Mishmi people, was talking to them in 2016 about the Tiger Reserve project. A 45-year-old Mishmi man named Angeche, I don't know whether I'm pronouncing the name correctly, asked Ambika, why a tiger reserve here? We don't hunt tigers. They are our brothers. Tigers and humans were born to the same mother. We kill tigers only as a last option when they become a human threat or when they are killed in traps accidentally. We are protecting them anyway. Now that's what the man, 45-year-old man told Ambika. If we leave aside the question of tiger conservation and focus on the relation between these people and the animal, we see how the sibling relation between the non-humans and humans, like as in Francis of Assisi's case, has persisted for thousands of years until about 5 years ago in this country, where we are sitting and talking about, environmental humanities. Angeche is certainly not metaphorizing the kinship between humans and tigers. From what we have said so far, it is evident that Tine, or what Lynn White called as pagan animist society, or simply primal societies, is marked by continuity of nature, supernature, and the human. We already saw that the being of the human inexorably interpenetrates that of nature and supernature and constitutes Tine. Therefore, Tine studies will include studies of all the three members of Tine, human, nature, and supernature, not individually in an interdisciplinary manner, but relationally, as each member is defined by the relation in which that member stands to the others. The study of a member in isolation will not yield the truth about the member, which is likely to be the case even if you go for interdisciplinarity. Such a study will not be put into such compartments as the humanities, the social sciences, and the other sciences, but will address the relation between humans and all that is not human. The continuity of human and non-human, including supernature, in communitarian form is the fundamental characteristic of Tine, which is a communitarian order that preceded the caste social order in India, but the state societies in the other parts of the world, but also found even today among the tribal people like the Mishmis all over the world. So Tine studies addresses the entire primal communitarian order, not just a part of it, say humans or the non-humans. The three broad groups of academic disciplines, namely the humanities, social sciences, and natural sciences, are inadequate because each studies an isolated part of the organically whole community. If humanities is concerned about humans, social sciences, humanities is concerned about humans, social sciences is about human society, and natural sciences is about nature, as we know. Even as the human is not represented by a part of the human, such as the hand, the Tine communitarian order of which all beings and their work cannot be represented by a part of this humanitarian order, such as the humans. At this point, we may like to think that the problem can be solved by cross-fertilizing the humanities and natural sciences. As I've been repeating, this approach is inadequate because it does not challenge the underlying presupposition, namely the discreteness of the human and the non-human. Unless we revise the presupposition, the disciplines in the three broad domains will continue to adopt methodologies which will misrepresent the ontically continuous Tine community. Therefore, the present academic disciplinary groups will have to be completely recast into a new disciplinary collective, which will be about the differentiably continuous human who is nothing less than a Tine or home. It's our come round at last, casting off the slough of humanities, social sciences, and natural sciences. The new rough beast, Tine studies, already slouches towards the academia. Thank you very much.
Thanks a ton, Dr. Nirmal Selvarmani, sir, for instilling in us the felt need to somehow revamp our education system and think along the lines of Tinai. You instilled in us the predicament of students that humanities do not have a practical arm. You spoke about culture not being nature. You took us through and gave us an insight on ecologization of humanities and the problems associated with it. And you spoke about holism as an alternative worldview. And all of this was insightful to us. And the fact that you presented the philosopher's viewpoint of critics of human and human as the whole world all provided us the much needed insight. And your concluding remarks that Tinai studies would focus on human nature and supernature definitely helped us to have a better perspective. And now it's a time for a Q&A session, and I request Mr. Edwin Moses to coordinate the Q&A session. It's over to Mr. Edwin.
Now the session is open for Q&A session. Participants can put your questions in the chat box. Sir, I have two questions. What is the difference between Indian eco-criticism and Western eco-criticism? Number two is, can you comment on the relevance of indigenous knowledge in addressing the ecological crisis? Or can we apply, and also can we apply Tinai theory to the study of indigenous communities across the world?
Thank you very much for those questions. The first question is about the difference between eco-criticism in India and the other countries in the world. I think though eco-criticism was defined as criticism which uses ecological concepts to interpret texts, the whole world follows Glotfelty's definition of eco-criticism as study of the relationship between literature and the environment. And there lies the difference. Indian eco-criticism, at least as you know, our collective in India perceived it and perceives it, continues to perceive it even now, does not buy that Glotfeltian definition of eco-criticism. So that is the major difference. And about the second question, is Tinai applicable to the other indigenous societies in the world? Is that the question?
Yes, sir.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Tinai as a theory is expounded in Tolkapiam and also represented in the Tinai songs and Sangam literature and later literature too. But it is really about the entire earth. So Tinai is about the basic biomes in the world, as I have said, you know, even in the early 80s in the essay, The Alternative Social Order. It's about the whole earth. I mean, it's a kind of social order, if you like. I mean, social, not in the sense we understand it now as a human society, but if you include the non-humans also as part of the society, including the spirit beings, then it's a social order for the entire world. I mean, this is how the entire world was probably, you know, organized as a society before the state society. So this is why, you know, I call Tinai as the pre-Anthropocenic sort of social order. If you like to think that the Anthropocene commences not with the Industrial Revolution, as Paul Crutzen and Stormer, you know, said, but if you like to take it way back to the origin of the state societies in the Holocene, about which Dr. Speedy was also talking about, to probably, you know, 9,000 years ago. I mean, so Tinai social order precedes that Holocene, you know. So this is why kind of restoring this, restoring this Tinai social order amounts to putting an end to the Anthropocene and inaugurating what I would call the Tinai-cene. So what I am dreaming of is the neo-Tinai-cene, because Tinai-cene was something that, you know, existed in the pre-state societies. So it's not probably possible to bring it back as such. So the new kind of Tinai social order would be a neo-Tinai-cene. So it's a way of life for the entire earth, as I see it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir.
பேராசிரியருக்கு வணக்கம். தமிழில் 2 வினாக்கள் முன்வைக்கப்பட்டுள்ளன. நீங்கள் மூத்த பேராசிரியர் என்கிற அளவில் இந்த வினா முன்வைக்கப்பட்டதாக நான் உணர்கிறேன். தமிழக அளவில் தமிழ் மற்றும் ஆங்கில துறைகளில் திணை சார்ந்த புரிதல் கண்ணோட்டத்தில் குறிப்பாக கல்லூரிகளில் பாடத்திட்டங்கள் வகுக்கப்படுவதாக நீங்கள் உணர்கிறீர்களா? இது தொடர்பாக உங்களுடைய ஆலோசனைகளை எதிர்பார்க்கிறோம் என்று ஒரு வினா.
நன்றி. தமிழ் கேட்பதற்கே மகிழ்ச்சியா இருக்கின்றது. Sorry, Dr. Speedy, you probably may not follow somebody who translate, or probably I myself could translate that a little later. நான் தமிழிலே நீங்க கேட்டதுனால தமிழிலே சொல்றேன். திணை முழுமையாக இன்னும் அது தமிழ்நாட்டுக்கு வரவில்லை, தமிழ்நாட்டில் இல்லை என்று சொல்லலாம். நான் சொன்னேன் உங்களுக்கு 70கள், அதாவது ஏறத்தாழ 70கள் நிறைவுறுகின்ற காலகட்டத்திலே இந்த திணை குமுகாய அமைப்பை தொடங்கினோம் என்று. அந்த காலகட்டத்திலே இது ஒரு குமுகாய அமைப்பாக இது இந்த கருத்து உருப்பெற்றது. ஆனால் இது இன்னும் வலுப்பெற்று அது முழுமையான ஒரு நிறைவை அடையவில்லை என்றுதான் சொல்ல வேண்டும். அதாவது இப்பொழுது மக்கள் எந்த அளவில் இருக்கின்றார்கள் என்றால், திணையில் உள்ள பல்வேறு அம்சங்களை அவர்கள் ஆதரிக்கின்றார்கள். எடுத்துக்காட்டாக உணவு எடுத்துக்கொண்டு என்றால், பலரும் என்று ஏன் அரிசியையே சாப்பிட்டு கொண்டிருக்கின்றோம், திணையை ஏன் சாப்பிடக்கூடாது, வரகு கம்பு ஏன் சாப்பிடக்கூடாது என்று அப்படி செல்கின்றார்கள். சிலர் நாங்கள் திணை குடிகளினுடைய வாரிசுகள் என்று தங்களுடைய வம்சாவளியை அப்படி பார்க்க முனைகின்றார்கள். இப்படி நீங்கள் இங்கு சென்னையிலே தக்ஷின் சித்ரா என்று ஒரு இடம் இருக்கின்றது. இது கேளிக்கை புறமாக இருக்கு, ஆனால் அது மிகவும் பயனுள்ள ஒரு பொழுதுபோக்கு இடம் தக்ஷின் சித்ரா என்பது. அங்கு நீங்கள் சென்றிருந்தீர்கள் என்றால் பார்த்திருப்பீர்கள், திணை டயோராமா என்று ஒன்றை வைத்திருக்கின்றார்கள். அதாவது நிஜமாக நமக்கு ஒரு சின்ன அளவிலே திணையை பார்த்தது போல் 5 அந்த திணைகளையும் அவர்கள் அமைத்து வைத்திருக்கின்றார்கள். இது என்னோடும் இன்னும் சில பேராசிரியர்களோடு சென்னை கிறிஸ்தவ கல்லூரியில் டெபோரா தியாகராஜன் அவர்கள் ஆலோசனை பெற்று இந்த டயோராமாவை அங்கு அமைத்தார்கள். இது இன்று பல்லாயிரம் மக்களுக்கு இந்த திணையை பற்றி ஓரளவு என்ன என்று சொல்கின்றது. இப்படியெல்லாம் ஓரளவில் திணையை பற்றி இங்கும் அங்குமாக ஏதோ 1-2ஆக தான் இந்த திணை இன்று இருக்கின்றதே தவிர, நான் இப்பொழுது உங்களுக்கு சொன்னது போல ஆங்கிலத்தில் இது ஒரு வாழ்க்கை நெறி, மலர வேண்டிய ஒரு குமுகாய நெறி என்பதான ஒரு சிந்தனை இன்னும் வலுப்பெறவில்லை. ஏனென்றால் பலருக்கு அதில் நம்பிக்கை இல்லை என்றுதான் சொல்ல வேண்டும். இது எப்படி சாத்தியம்? நீங்கள் இன்னும் அந்த கேள்வியை கேட்கவில்லை. நிச்சயமாக இந்த கூட்டத்தில் யாராவது ஒருவர் அதை கேட்பார்கள். இது எப்படி, இதெல்லாம் இன்றைக்கு சாத்தியப்படுமா என்று. இவ்வளவு தொழில்நுட்பத்தில் நாம் மேற்சென்று கொண்டிருக்கின்ற காலகட்டத்தில் நீங்கள் திணையை பற்றி பேசுவதே நகைப்புக்கு இடமாக இருக்கின்றது என்பதுதான் பெருவாரியான சிந்தனையாக இருக்கின்றது. இதை எதிர்த்து இந்த திணை இயக்கத்தை கொண்டு செல்வதுதான் மிகப்பெரிய சவால். நன்றி.
நன்றி பேராசிரியரே. குறிப்பாக உங்களுடைய கருத்தை நாங்களும் வழிமொழிகிறோம். ஏனென்றால் இன்றைக்கு இருக்கக்கூடிய பெருந்தொற்று காலகட்டங்களில் நம்முடைய முன்னோர்கள் கையாண்ட திணை சார்ந்த உணவு முறையை இன்று குறிப்பாக மருத்துவம் சார்ந்த நிலையில் மட்டும்தான் நாம் பயன்படுத்துகிறோம் என்கிற உண்மையையும் நாம் உணர்ந்து வருகின்றோம். மற்றொரு வினா, தற்காலத்தில் திணை வாழ்வியல் என்பது தற்சார்பு உடையதாக உள்ளதா? விளக்குங்கள் என்று ஒரு வினா முன்வைத்துள்ளார்கள்.
அந்த தற்சார்பு நன்றி. நாம் இந்த வெபினாரை கேட்டுக்கொண்டிருப்பவர்கள் எல்லாரும் தமிழை விளங்கிக் கொள்வார்கள் தானே? தமிழில் பேசுவதில் தவறில்லையோ?
தயங்காமல் பேசுங்கள் பேராசிரியரே.
நன்றி நன்றி. அந்த தற்சார்பு என்பது அதை எப்படி விளங்கிக் கொள்வது என்று நான் நினைக்கின்றேன். அதாவது இந்தியாவில் நாம் எடுத்து பொழுது இந்தியா ஒரு திணை குமுகாய நாடாக மாற வேண்டும் என்று அது நினைத்தால், அப்படி மாறியதென்றால் இன்றைய உலகில் அது நடக்கக்கூடியதா? அது சாத்தியப்படுமா? ஏனென்றால் இன்று எல்லா நாடுகளும் இணைந்த நிலையில் இருக்கின்ற பொழுது ஒரு நாடு மட்டுமோ அல்லது ஒரு நாட்டின் ஒரு பகுதியோ, ஒரு மாநிலமோ அல்லது மாநிலத்தில் ஒரு பகுதியோ அது மட்டும் திணை அமைப்பில் இருக்க இயலுமா? அதுதான் கேள்வி என்று நான் நினைக்கின்றேன். கேள்வி அது என்றால் அது உண்மைதான், அது மிக கடினம். ஆக இந்த திணை அமைப்பிற்கு மாறுவது என்பது ஒரு அரசியல் பொருளாதார அளவில் அரசியல் பொருளாதார நிலையை மாற்றும் திறன் வாய்ந்த அரசு முடிவு எடுத்தால்தான் இது முழு அளவில் இது நிறைவேறும். நாம் சொல்லுகின்ற அந்த திணை நிறைவேறும். ஆனால் அத்தகைய முடிவை அரசுகள் மேற்கொள்ள முடியுமா, அது சாத்தியமா என்ற கேள்வியை நீங்கள் கேட்டால் அது சாத்தியம்தான் என்பதுதான் என்னுடைய விடை. ஏனென்றால் அதுவும் சாத்தியமில்லை என்றால் நான் இதை பற்றி பேசிக் கொண்டிருப்பதில் பயனில்லை. 1991 நாம் ஒரு புதிய பொருளாதார கொள்கையை நாம் பற்றி கொண்டோம், அதுக்கு மாறிக்கொண்டோம். அதற்கு முன்னால் இந்தியா ஒரு தனி விவசாய நாடாக, வேளாண் நாடாக இருந்தது. 91க்கு பிறகு ஒரு புதிய பொருளாதார கொள்கையினால் நம்முடைய பொருளாதாரத்தையே, அதனால் இன்னும் அரசு அமைப்பும் கூட பெருளவில் அது மாறி இருக்கின்றது. இந்த மாதிரியான மாற்றத்தை அன்று இருந்த அரசியல்வாதிகளும் பொருளாதார நிபுணர்களும் இந்த மாற்றம் தேவை என்ற முடிவு மேற்கொண்டதால் அந்த முடிவு ஏற்பட்டது. ஆக அத்தகைய முடிவை இன்று அரசியல்வாதிகளும் திறனை, ஆற்றலை கையில் வைத்திருக்கின்றவர்களும் நினைத்தால் நிச்சயமாக முடியும்.
நன்றி பேராசிரியரே. தற்சார்பு வாழ்க்கை என்பது ஒரு தனி மனிதனாலோ அல்லது ஒரு குறிப்பிட்ட ஒரு சமூகத்தாலோ இயலாத ஒன்று. அதே நேரத்தில் அது அரசோடு இந்திய அரசாக இருக்கட்டும் அல்லது உலக அளவிலான பல்வேறு நாடுகளைச் சேர்ந்த அரசுகளாக இருக்கட்டும், அது அரசாங்கத்தோடு தொடர்புடையது என்கிற ஒரு சிந்தனையை உங்களுடைய கருத்துக்கள் மூலமாக புரிந்து கொண்டோம். தமிழில் இறுதி வினா ஒன்று.
வணக்கங்க சார்.
வணக்கம்.
தமிழ்ல இருக்கிற திணை அமைப்பு போல வேறு சமூகங்களில் இந்த மாதிரி திணை சார் அமைப்புகளை பின்பற்றி இருக்கிறாங்களா? அது தமிழுக்கு மட்டும் இருக்கிற மிகப்பெரிய சிறப்பா? ஆங்கில இலக்கியம் படித்ததனால் இது உங்களிடம் கேட்கிறேன். நன்றி.
நன்றி. ஆங்கில இலக்கியத்தை படித்து நீங்கள் தமிழில் கேள்வியை கேட்டிருக்கின்றீர்கள். மிக்க மிக்க நன்றி. திணை என்ற சொல்லோ அல்லது திணையை பற்றிய கோட்பாடோ தமிழுக்கே உரியது. திணை என்பது தனி தமிழ் சொல். அது வேறு எந்த மொழியிலிருந்தும் கடன் பெற்ற சொல் அன்று. அது நல்ல சொல். அந்த சொல்லை பற்றி சொல்ல வேண்டும் என்றால் நான் அதை பற்றிய ஒரு பொழிவை நிகழ்த்தலாம். ஆனால் நான் அதை தவிர்க்கின்றேன். நிறைய கட்டுரைகள் இருக்கின்றன, நீங்கள் பார்க்கலாம். ஆனால் இந்த திணை என்பது சொல்லக்கூடிய வாழ்க்கை நெறி அல்லது குமுகாய நெறி என்பது நாம் பெரும்பாலும் நாம் பழங்குடி மக்கள் என்று சொல்கின்ற மக்களுடைய வாழ்க்கையில் நாம் பெரிதும் காணக்கூடியது. அது உலகினுடைய எல்லா பகுதிகளிலும் இருக்கின்ற பழங்குடி மக்களுடைய வாழ்க்கையிலும் நாம் அதை காணலாம். ஆனால் நான் இந்த திணையை பற்றி பேசும் பொழுது ஆங்கிலத்தில் பிரைமல் என்ற சொல்லை பயன்படுத்துகின்றேன். நான் இண்டிஜினஸ் என்றோ அல்லது ட்ரைபல் என்றோ அந்த சொல்லை பயன்படுத்துவதில்லை. ஏனென்றால் அதற்கு சில காரணங்கள் இருக்கின்றன. ஏனென்றால் ட்ரைபல் என்று நாம் ஆங்கிலத்தில் அதை சொன்னால் வெவ்வேறு ட்ரைபல் சொசைட்டிஸ் அல்லது பழங்குடிகள் வெவ்வேறு நிலையிலான நாகரிகத்தை அடைந்தவர்களாக இருக்கின்றார்கள். முற்றிலுமாக இந்த அரசு குமுகாயத்திற்குள்ளேயே வராமல், அதாவது எம்என் ஸ்ரீனிவாஸ் சொன்னது போல மாடர்னைசேஷனே இல்லாத ஒரு பழங்குடி என்பது மிகவும் அரிதாக இன்று காணக்கூடியது. ஏதோ ஓரளவில் அவர்களிடம் இந்த அரசு குமுகாய தன்மைகள் அவர்களிடம் வந்து சேர்ந்திருக்கும். அதனால்தான் இந்த ட்ரைபல் என்ற சொல் பிரச்சனையான சொல். அதே போல் இண்டிஜினஸ் என்பதையும் யுனைடெட் நேஷன் அவர்கள் ஒருவாறாக அதற்கு விளக்கம் கொடுத்துள்ளார்கள். ஆக அந்த சொற்களை எல்லாம் தவிர்த்து நான் பிரைமல் என்ற சொல்லை ஆங்கிலத்தில் பயன்படுத்துகின்றேன். ஆனால் திணை என்பதையே தமிழில் நாம் சொல்லலாம். ஆக அந்த திணை என்ற வாழ்க்கை, அதாவது மனிதனும் மனிதன் அல்லாதவையும் இணை முறையிலான ஒரு உறவு கொண்டு வாழ்கின்ற அந்த வாழ்க்கை முறை என்பது நாம் பழங்குடிகளில், பெருவாரியான பழங்குடிகளில் நாம் காண கிடக்கின்றது. ஆக அது தமிழுக்கு மட்டும் உரியதன்று, அது பொதுவானது. ஆனால் சொல்லும் கோட்பாடும் தமிழுக்கே உரியது.
Sir, shall we take more questions, sir?
It's up to you. And
from Yasmin, sir, which point is actually...
Just give me 2 minutes. Edwin, can you just give me 1 minute?
Yeah, yes.
Yes, Edwin, here I am.
Sir, which point is the paradigm shift from eco-criticism to climate change? By Yasmin.
Sorry, I don't understand that question. Can the one who raises this question explain a little bit?
Unmute and explain if you want to, maybe the one who asked the question. Yasmin? Can you be more elaborate?
Sir, am I audible, sir? Good afternoon,
Yes,
sir.
yes, you are. Good afternoon.
Sir, thank you for giving the time, sir. So my question is, actually, people, until a point of time, people were talking about this eco-criticism and the environmental criticism, ecology and all those things. Actually, very recently, people are talking about this climate change. I do not know how to look at these two different things. Are they one and the same, or they were, or they are two different field of study?
Okay.
Or it's just development from eco-criticism to climate change. Could you please elaborate on that, sir?
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Well, as Dr. Speedy pointed out in his talk, climate change issue had been talked about from 19th century onwards. Though we have, made that a very important topic, if not the most important topic in all of, international relations today. That's a recent phenomenon. Climate change acquiring this kind of importance. It is particularly acquired this kind of importance, particularly from 2000 onwards, after this word Anthropocene, has been kind of coined by Crutzen and Stomer, and also with the great acceleration that happened, after the Second World War, which has really intensified the Anthropocene, worsened it rather. So that is why, we need to talk about, the global climate the crisis that is being caused by this 1.2 degrees centigrade rise in the global temperature, about which Speedy was showing you the graphs and so on. If you like, you must watch this movie, Inconvenient Truth, it must be available on the net, for free. Al Gore's very interesting Infinite Truth. That's also about, this climate change. So it's not a recent thing, but it has its own, if you take it as a separate subject, it has its own history, the way Dr. Speedy was talking about it. And if you take eco-criticism, it has its own history. Of course, its history begins with Joseph Maker, as you know, his book, The Comedy of Survival, where he used the word literary ecology, which Glotfelty and Fromm used in their eco-criticism reader, landmarks in literary ecology. They titled the eco-criticism reader. The subtitle is, uses the phrase literary ecology. Actually, that's borrowed from Maker. So it's a pure, 20th century discipline, eco-criticism. Tinay does not come under this. I think, Tinay studies is a sort of eco-criticism, but then it is a very, very ancient, more than 2,000-year-old kind of discipline. But it was born before the word was ecology was coined or eco-criticism was coined. So it's an entirely different thing altogether. But if you are looking at this English word eco-criticism, that has a very recent history. Only in the 1970s, the word is coined and the discipline. The first course was offered, I think, in MCC, Tamil Poetics, in the early 80s, and then 1899 in University of Nevada at Reno. Glotfelty was the first professor of that course, Literature and Environment. So that has a very recent history, eco-criticism as a discipline, particularly academic discipline. So climate change has become a very important topic for eco-critics. Now, a lot of things are important topics like toxic, material. It has become a sub-discipline like toxic discourse, they call it. Okay? Garbage disposal, disposing nuclear waste, for example, or disposing all of these waste from hospitals, bio-waste. After treating a COVID patient, all of these syringes and so on, what do? We dump them in the ocean, right? And in the places where Aboriginal, indigenous people live, in the third world countries and so on. So all of these are problems or issues for eco-critics. So climate change is also an issue which eco-critics talk about. Eco-critic will probably take up a text, a movie, a poem, a play, a musical piece or something like that, which deals with climate change, and then interpret that text using ecological concept. That is what I or my students would do in my course, eco-criticism. Does that make sense?
Okay, we'll move on to the next question. Karpagavalli Natrajan. Sir, does pan-humanism aids for symbiosis of human with the non-human forms of lives?
Yeah. Well, thank you for that question. As I was telling you in my presentation, pan-humanism is an interesting word that Gary Snyder coined because it takes into its ambit the non-human. But then the problem with that term is it neither addresses the idea of the human nor the idea of environment. So because Snyder kind of falls back on the normative definitions of the human and the environment, I would not recommend pan-humanism, though it kind of embraces the non-human in a certain way. My whole point is we need to challenge the fundamental presupposition. Our idea about the human and environment.
Next question from Dinesh Rajadurai. Is place a major point in eco-criticism? How place and space has been differentiated under eco-study?
Yeah. Well, yeah, okay. If you have read Glotfelty from the Eco-Criticism Reader, she raises some important questions. Eco-critic, these are the questions you will ask. And one of her questions is about place, which right now you're talking about. So how does this particular text represent place? Okay. So if you raise that question, you are an eco-critic and you're raising that question. Now, I think what Glotfelty means is, place is connected with environment. When you say environment, place is part of the environment. And so if you are talking about place, you are talking about environment, and then you are really, doing something that is eco-critical, something which can be called eco-critical. Now leave that aside and come to Tinay. Place is a very important concept in Tinay. Now, it's not just an important concept, it is the mudal, as it is said. The mudal consists of nilamum poludum. So that way, it is the foundation of Tinay. Now, Tinay is never an abstract idea. Tinay is not at all interior landscape, as Ramanujan put it. Tinay is very much concrete, and Tinay is not Tinay if you are not talking about concrete definitive place. So it's an absolutely essential theme in Tinay, as well as Tinay criticism, as well as in eco-criticism.
The last question from Angelin. Sir, giving back the subaltern their agency help in the creation of a new Tinay social order? Sir, will giving back the subaltern, yeah, the same thing, their agency help in the creation of a new Tinay social order?
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, definitely, I understand what you mean by giving agency is. I'm sure you are thinking of good agency. I mean, and the result of that agency being well-being for all of humans and non-humans. I don't know whether you really, meant it, but I would like to, think that way. So if you're talking about that kind of agency, that's good. I mean, we need to do that. You probably were listening to what I was saying about the word savage, how it can very much be a stereotype or even an archetype for all the Adivasis and the subalterns, the handicapped, and so on. But if, there is going to be a hierarchic, or what I would even call a homoarchic state, where power is concentrated, all kinds of power, I mean, economic, political, all kinds of power, concentrated among one group of people, then what is the point in these subalterns gaining agency? Now, this is why I'm asking for a total change, a change of the entire society, not just a section, not just the change of just one section of, that society. And all of these words, section and all these, please understand, I hope you taking it in the spirit that I mean. For me, humans and non-humans are not brought together by the English word and. It is not a conjunctive relation. Okay? Not humans and non-humans, but humans somehow interpenetrating into the being of the non-humans, and non-humans interpenetrating into the being of humans. It's that kind of a world that I'm really imagining. That is what Tinay is all about.
Thank you, sir, for these enlightening answers. Sir, can you translate maybe a small portion of what you spoke about earlier with regard to Tinay in English, maybe?
Yeah.
Spoken Tamil.
I forget some of them, but then the last thing that we were talking about. Yeah. So
with regard to Tinay perspective.
Yeah. So I was saying that it is not enough to, address issues of the humans or the non-humans separately. I mean, like somebody, the one who asked the last question was talking about, empowering the weaker sections of the people, like giving agency to the subalterns. That's how she put it. So that kind of thing is, addressing human issues. Like, now, my whole point is, it is not, that we need to get out of this kind of thinking. We need to think of a community in which humans and the non-humans are organically related. I am the non-human myself to some extent. Okay? So we are not talking about somebody else, like the subaltern is out there. Like, I am that subaltern. Okay? Every one of us. The elephants and the mosquitoes and the macaques and water and air and all that is not outside. It's all me. So we need that kind of a presupposition is not there anywhere in sight. All of our education, the humanities, social sciences, and sciences are all based on the idea of the human borrowed from liberal humanism, where a human is enclosed within his own body. So we need to get rid of that assumption first. So we need to revamp the entire, approach to knowledge. So that is what Tinay really calls for.
Thanks a ton. Sorry. Thanks a ton, Dr. Nirmal Selvaraj, sir, Mr. Edwin, Dr. Muni, sir, for enabling the session to be a thought-provoking and reflective one. The session did give us some invaluable, enduring take-home learnings. Thanks a ton, everyone. The most beautiful way to start and end any session is with a grateful heart. And for us Hiberians, it's an ingrained culture and belief that no duty is more urgent than that of returning thanks. On behalf of the organizers, we express a genuine gratitude to all those who made the session a memorable and cherished one.
Thank you.
Audience, please note that Sir, Dr. Nirmal, sir, thanks a lot, sir.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And dear participants, please note that the feedback link has been posted in the chat. You can please fill it up.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for your erudite answers, addressing and enlightening me. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your erudite answers and enlightening the participants with their deliberations. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Welcome, Dr. Moses.
All around us, nature is slowly disappearing. We all have it in us to do something about it. We are indebted to take actions to prevent beautiful nature from dying by being eco-conscious. Post-lunch, we would commence the technical sessions, sharing our eco-consciousness through the scientific research we had carried out in our respective disciplines.
Thank you, one and all.